Hi everyone, I'm Lena, 40F, and if I'm being honest, I didn't think I'd ever be the kind of person to share something like this online. I've always kept my family drama private, mostly to avoid the embarrassment of admitting just how far I let things go. But after what happened with my sister Isla, 33F, I'm starting to realize that silence only protects the wrong people. This is the story of how my younger sister turned what should have been a joyful moment for our family into something that still leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. It's not just about a wedding. It's about betrayal, manipulation, and finally drawing the line with someone who's been taking advantage of me for years. But let me start from the beginning. I'm the oldest of three girls. Isla is the youngest, and we have a middle sister named Camilla, 37F. Though she lives abroad and isn't really part of this story, she distanced herself from the family years ago, and now I finally understand why. Growing up, I was the dependable one, the overachiever, the one who never got into trouble and who always made sure things ran smoothly in a house where chaos was the norm. My parents, Mark and Elena, weren't the worst, but they had a very clear favorite, and it wasn't subtle. Isla could do no wrong. When I say she was spoiled, I don't mean in the typical, got a few more gifts on Christmas kind of way. I mean, she wrecked our mom's car at 17, and I got lectured for not teaching her how to be more responsible. She dropped out of college after 2 semesters, and my parents let her move back home rent-free for 5 years while I was working 2 jobs to pay off student loans. Every time Islam made a mess, someone else was expected to clean it up, and more often than not, that person was me. I used to tell myself that I was just being a good sister, that one day she'd grow out of it, that if I kept showing up for her, she'd eventually learn to appreciate it. Spoiler, she didn't. Fast forward to last year. Isla announced she was engaged to Nico, a guy she'd been dating off and on for a while. I was cautiously optimistic. He seemed polite, had a steady job in property management, and most importantly, he seemed to genuinely love her. Maybe, I thought, this would be the thing that helped Isla mature. She called me the day after the proposal. I remember her voice was practically shaking with excitement. "Oh my gosh, Lena, we're getting married. And I need your help. You're the only one I trust with this stuff." It didn't feel manipulative in the moment. It felt sincere, like maybe we were finally going to have something real between us. Not just obligation, but connection. I said yes before she even asked what kind of help she meant. Of course, I assumed she meant help with planning. Venue scouting, guest lists, timelines, all of which I was actually kind of excited about. I'd helped organize events for work before, and I liked that kind of structure. What I didn't realize was that when Isla said help, what she really meant was do everything and pay for it, too. It started small. She sent me Pinterest boards of dresses and flower arrangements and said things like, "Can you talk to this vendor for me? I get anxious making those calls." Or, "I don't really understand contracts. Can you look this over?" I didn't mind. At first. Then came the budget. Isla claimed she and Nico had about $10,000 saved. When I gently explained that wouldn't be enough for the kind of wedding she was picturing, she sighed dramatically. "I know. That's why I'm asking you. You're the only one in the family who's good with money." I should have said no. I should have said I'd help with advice, not with my savings. Instead, I offered to cover the venue deposit, just the deposit, as a gift. That was the start of the slope. Every week, there was something new. The dress she couldn't pass up, the live acoustic trio she already booked, the imported desserts that were non-refundable. Each time, she'd say, "It's just a little bit more. You'll be paid back after the honeymoon when Nico's bonus comes in." I kept a spreadsheet of everything I covered. By the end of it, I had contributed nearly $50,000. $50,000. I didn't tell anyone, not even my partner. I was embarrassed. Ashamed, even. But I justified it to myself by saying it was family. It was a one-time thing. And besides, it felt good to be needed. Throughout the planning process, Isla got more controlling. She wanted things done her way, but without doing any of the actual work. If I brought up budgets or limits, she'd accuse me of trying to ruin her vision. If I asked questions, she'd go silent for days and then send guilt-laced voice notes about how overwhelmed she was. Still, I hung in. I told myself I just needed to get her to the finish line. Then came the final month before the wedding. I noticed Isla stopped looping me in on meetings. The florist sent an updated invoice with things I hadn't approved. The venue coordinator emailed me asking who the point of contact was. Apparently, Isla had asked them to remove me from all communications. I texted her to ask what was going on. No reply. I called. Straight to voicemail. I assumed she was just stressed. Maybe she needed space. So I backed off and waited. A few days later, I got a text from her. It was 2 lines. If you want to be part of it, you can watch the live stream, LOL. Less pressure for everyone. That was it. No invitation. No explanation. Just that. I stared at my phone, feeling like the air had been knocked out of me. I didn't respond. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up my spreadsheet, and started making calls. Every vendor I had booked and paid for, I let them know I was no longer financially responsible. I gave them Isla's contact info, confirmed they'd have to seek payment from her directly, and asked to be removed from all records. Some were surprised. Some were annoyed. But all of them understood. By the time I was done, I had erased myself from her wedding entirely, just as she apparently wanted. The next morning, the phone call started. First Isla, then my mother, then Nico, and then someone I hadn't heard from in years. I turned off my phone that night after the calls wouldn't stop. Isla had left me 7 voice messages by mid-morning, each one increasingly desperate. The first was short and indignant. Lena, what's going on? The venue says they're missing payment? Why are they even calling me? The second was defensive. I thought we agreed you'd help. You said you wanted to help. By the fourth, her tone had shifted completely. You're putting me in a really bad spot here. Nico's freaking out. The wedding is in a week. And by the 7th, she was nearly in tears. If you don't fix this, I don't know what I'm going to do. I thought we were family. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have things to say, believe me, I did, but because I realized something after hearing those voicemails. Not once did she ask why I pulled out. Not once did she acknowledge that what she did, deliberately excluding me after everything I'd contributed, might have hurt me. Her messages weren't apologies. They were demands. Accusations. Emotional pressure dressed up as concern. I spent the day quietly, doing what I rarely allowed myself to do. Nothing. I took a long walk. I sat in the park. I let my mind wander, free from the weight of logistics, invoices, and catering contracts. I felt oddly clear. But that clarity didn't last long. That evening, someone knocked on my door. I was expecting it to be a delivery, or maybe even Isla herself. What I didn't expect was to see Nico standing there, looking like he hadn't slept. Can I come in? He asked, rubbing the back of his neck. I really think we need to talk. I hesitated, but opened the door. He walked in slowly, holding his phone like he didn't quite know what to do with it. For a moment, I just stared at him, waiting for whatever lecture or guilt trip he'd come to deliver. But it didn't come. Instead, he sat down on the edge of my couch, looked around like he was seeing my place for the first time, and said quietly, I didn't know. That caught me off guard. You didn't know what? He looked up at me, and I could tell there was genuine frustration in his expression, but not directed at me. I didn't know you paid for everything. I didn't know the venue, the flowers, even the band. I thought it was all coming from her parents and a little from you. Maybe, but... His voice trailed off. Then he pulled out his phone and opened something, a spreadsheet. My spreadsheet. Isla accidentally left her laptop open, he said, tapping the screen. This was in her email. You kept track of every payment, every vendor, every single receipt. You weren't just helping. You were running the whole thing. I nodded once, slowly. I wasn't trying to expose her, I said. I needed to stay organized. It got out of hand, and I couldn't keep it in my head anymore. He let out a low exhale. She told me you backed out because you were jealous, that you didn't want to see her get married before you. My stomach twisted. That old narrative. Isla had been using it for years, that I was bitter, lonely, envious of her freedom. I don't care who gets married first, I said quietly. I cared that she didn't even invite me. After everything. Nico nodded, looking ashamed. Then he said something I'll never forget. She told me you insisted you didn't want to be in the wedding, that you were too stressed to handle it. So she was being respectful by giving you space. I blinked at him. She actually said that? He nodded, and I believed her. I sat down in the chair across from him, hands clasped. Why are you telling me all this? He looked at me and said, because I think I might be marrying someone who lies to everyone around her, and I need to know how deep it goes. We talked for almost an hour. I told him about the years of enabling, the time Isla got a DUI and begged me to pretend she was at my apartment, the thousands of dollars she'd borrowed and never repaid, The way she had always painted herself as misunderstood while everyone else cleaned up her messes. To his credit, Nico didn't defend her. He didn't argue. He just listened. When he finally stood up to leave, he looked conflicted, like a man trying to untangle a rope he'd been slowly winding around himself without realizing. "She's not who I thought she was," he said as he reached the door. "But I don't know how to walk away this close to the wedding." I didn't tell him what to do. I just said, "That's your decision. But if you want to know what the next 30 years look like with someone like Isla, just ask my parents." He didn't say anything after that. He just left. The next day, I woke up to an email from the venue. Apparently, Isla had tried to claim I was still paying, and they wanted clarification before the event. I replied immediately and attached a formal withdrawal of payment responsibility. I had already signed the release form, but they wanted confirmation since Isla was still insisting it was a misunderstanding. That was when the texts started again. This time, they came from my mother. "Elena, Lena, what you're doing is vindictive and unnecessary. You've made your point. Now fix it. Be the bigger person." Then, 2 minutes later, "Elena, I raised you better than this. Family doesn't turn its back when things get hard." I didn't reply. 2 hours later, another knock on the door. This time it was my mother. She stood there in a beige coat, holding a stack of envelopes, and wearing that thin, polite smile she used when she was about to scold someone under the guise of just being honest. "Can we talk?" she asked, already stepping past me into the apartment. She didn't wait for permission. She never did. I followed her into the living room. She placed the envelopes on my coffee table, bills, invoices, and one printed spreadsheet. "My spreadsheet. I've looked over everything," she said briskly. "And I agree, you went above and beyond. But that's no excuse to destroy your sister's wedding." My jaw tightened. I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped paying for something I was excluded from. "You weren't excluded," she said, voice sharp. "You were just difficult to include. You get so controlling. You always have to manage everything." I stared at her. "You mean I was trying to make sure things didn't fall apart?" She brushed that off with a wave of her hand. "That's not the point. The point is, Isla made a few mistakes. But now she's panicking. You're punishing her." That word, punishing. Like I was the one who started this. Like I hadn't been dragged through 8 months of micromanaging someone else's dream wedding only to be kicked out of it. "I'm not punishing her," I said. "I'm protecting myself." My mother frowned. "She's your sister, Lena. That used to mean something to me." That got her attention. Her expression froze, and then hardened. "Well," she said, standing up and gathering the papers. "I can see you've made up your mind. Just know that if you go through with this, people will talk. The family will wonder why you ruined her big day. And I won't lie for you." She left without another word. And I sat there, alone again, realizing that every person who should have had my back had been standing behind Isla all along, even as she pushed me out of my own role in her life. But the story doesn't end there. Because 3 days later, I got a call from someone unexpected. It wasn't Isla. It wasn't Nico. It was someone from my past, someone who knew things Isla definitely didn't want getting out. And they had questions. About the money. About the lies. About everything. 3 days after my mother stormed out, I received a call that shifted everything. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but it looked familiar. I debated letting it ring out. I'd had enough of surprise calls lately. Enough of the guilt, the justifications, the gaslighting dressed as concern. But something made me answer. "Hello, Lena? Hey, it's Maddie. I wasn't sure if you still had the same number." It took me a second to place the voice. Maddie Clark. We went to high school together, and she'd been close friends with Isla for years. Or at least, she used to be. I hadn't spoken to her in ages. "Maddie? Wow. It's been a while." "I know," she said quickly. "And I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't important. I didn't even know you and Isla were having problems. Not until last night." I sat up straighter. "What happened last night?" There was a pause on the line. I could hear background noise. Maybe traffic, or a bustling cafe. "She was at Brielle's bachelorette dinner," Maddie said. "And let's just say, she'd had a few too many drinks." She started venting about the wedding. Loudly. Complaining about how you tried to sabotage her out of jealousy. That you were always trying to control everything. And that she had to cut you off before you ruined her moment. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. "But here's the part that made me call you," Maddie continued. "She told everyone that you offered to pay for the whole thing. and that when she tried to limit your involvement because you were being pushy, you pulled out to spite her. She called you a bitter, lonely spinster with too much money and not enough going on. I blinked, stunned for a moment. It wasn't that I didn't believe she'd say it. I did. But hearing it from someone else, word for word, hit differently. Maddie sighed. I'm sorry. I don't want to stir things up, but I know how much you've done for her over the years. It just felt wrong. She's rewriting the whole story. She was. And not just rewriting it. She was performing it, probably for sympathy, probably to save face, because the venue and the vendors and the caterer were all chasing her now. She had to frame it as betrayal, or else people would start asking questions she couldn't answer. Thanks for telling me, I said finally, my voice steady. Really? We hung up, but I didn't move for a while. I sat with the anger, letting it fill the quiet room. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was the years of excuses, the endless second chances, the way she manipulated everyone into seeing her as the victim every single time. But this time I had proof. And if she wanted to pretend I was the villain, fine. I'd show her what the villain was capable of. I didn't go for public revenge. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting at the wedding with a camera crew. That wasn't my style. I went for something quieter, colder, lasting. I started with the vendors. Most had already contacted Isla directly after I pulled my funding, but I still had relationships with them, and many had sent me emails or messages over the last few months, thanking me for my professionalism. I reached out personally to 3 of them, the florist, the venue coordinator, and the lighting company. I sent polite, professional messages, attaching copies of signed agreements showing that Isla had taken over financial responsibility. I also attached an email Isla herself had written, requesting that I be removed from the primary contact list. The tone of that message had been smug at the time. Now it was useful. I ended each message the same way. As I am no longer affiliated with this event, I do not wish to receive further communications. However, if you experience difficulty securing payment, I can provide you with records of all prior transactions and correspondence for legal purposes. I never outright said Isla was refusing to pay, but I planted the seed. From what I heard later, the florist canceled her final delivery after Isla's payment bounced. The lighting team demanded cash up front, and when it wasn't delivered by the due date, they dropped out entirely. But that was only the beginning. Next, I reached out to my cousin Julian, a quiet, thoughtful guy who had recently launched a local wedding photography business. I'd recommended him early in the planning process, and Isla had agreed, mostly because he gave her a hefty discount, since she was family. Julian and I met for coffee the next day. I didn't even have to explain the whole story. Word had already started to spread. She said you ghosted her, he told me. But honestly, I didn't believe it. You're the only one who even reads contracts. I smiled faintly. I'm not asking you to cancel, I said. But I think you should know what she's been telling people. And that the person who encouraged you to give her a discount, she doesn't think you're worth paying full price. He leaned back, frowning. So she's smearing me now too? I didn't say yes. I didn't have to. Julian emailed her that evening, canceling the shoot. No explanation. No offer to reschedule. He didn't have to say anything. The silence said it all. The week of the wedding arrived, and the cracks were beginning to show. I got a message from a mutual friend, Carla, who had been one of Isla's bridesmaids. She's unraveling, she wrote. Apparently, the new florist sent all the wrong arrangements, and the venue switched coordinators last minute. She's blaming everyone. Carla wasn't even sure the ceremony was still happening at the vineyard. There was talk of moving it to a smaller location nearby because of budget constraints. But the final blow? That came the night before the wedding. I got a call from a blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. It was Nico. Lena, I know this is probably the last thing you want to hear, but I'm not going through with it. I can't. After everything that's come out, I realized I've been lied to over and over again. I thought I was marrying someone flawed but sincere. Now I just feel used. I packed my things. I'm flying out tomorrow morning. He didn't ask for my help. He didn't ask me to talk to Isla. He just needed someone to know he was done. And that's when I realized I hadn't ruined her wedding. She had. I had simply stepped out of the way and let the truth catch up to her. The next morning, I made tea and sat by the window, watching the early sun rise over the rooftops. My phone lit up with dozens of missed calls. Isla, my mother, even one from my father, a man who had barely spoken to me in years. I didn't pick up. I didn't need to, because for once, I wasn't the one scrambling to fix anything. The days following Nico's departure felt like a strange kind of quiet. Not the peaceful silence you might hope for after a storm, but a heavy, suffocating tension hanging in the air. I didn't answer any calls for nearly a week. Not from Isla, not from my parents, no one. My phone became my sanctuary, a shield against the demands, accusations, and manipulations I was sure would come. And they did. First came the emails. Isla sent messages dripping with venom disguised as sorrow. You ruined everything. You've destroyed the family. I hope you're happy living with your bitterness. My mother's texts were worse. You've embarrassed us all. You betrayed your sister. We expected more from you. My father's tone was colder, but just as cutting. Your selfishness has consequences. Don't expect any help from us moving forward. They had all agreed, behind the scenes, to paint me as the villain. The cold, calculating sister who couldn't stand to see her younger sibling happy. I let them talk. I let them try to control the narrative. Because I knew the truth. The truth was this. I had spent nearly $50,000 of my own money to fund a wedding I was actively excluded from. A wedding where my role was erased without so much as a conversation. I had tried to be the responsible one, the calm center in a storm of entitlement and reckless spending. I had been lied to, manipulated, and ultimately discarded by my own family. And when I finally stepped back, they collapsed, not because I sabotaged them, but because their house of cards was never built on anything solid. After the initial storm, something unexpected happened. My parents stopped contacting me. No more calls. No more texts. No more guilt trips. They had, in effect, disowned me. And for the first time in years, I felt an unfamiliar but deeply needed relief. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their hollow apologies. I didn't need to keep patching up a family that saw me as expendable the moment I stopped funding their drama. Isla tried one last time to reach me, weeks later. Her message was short and cold. I hope you enjoy being alone. I didn't respond. Because the truth was, I already was. And it was better than the toxic chaos I'd endured. So what's the situation now? Isla's wedding never happened. The venue was never fully paid. Vendors sued or wrote off losses. The story leaked through the grapevine. Her friends distanced themselves, her social media dwindled, and Nico never returned. My parents retreated into silence, likely embarrassed by the mess. As for me, I focused on rebuilding my life. I paid off debts from the wedding fallout. I leaned on a few true friends who never judged or asked for anything in return. I stopped apologizing for setting boundaries. And most importantly, I stopped believing that family automatically means loyalty. In the end, I learned a painful truth. Sometimes, the people who claim to love you the most are the ones willing to throw you under the bus the second you stop serving their needs. I'm not interested in forgiveness or reconciliation. I'm interested in peace. And that's exactly what I'm building, one day at a time. Thank you for reading. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. My parents always said my sister was born to succeed. When I landed a high-paying job, they told me to recommend her instead because she needed it more. I refused. Hey Reddit, I'm Marcus, 34M, and this is a story I never really thought I'd tell, mostly because I've spent most of my life keeping my head down and staying quiet. But a recent conversation with my parents made something inside me snap, not in a dramatic way, more like quietly, like when a piece of wood breaks under too much pressure. You hear it, you feel it, but no one else notices. Until they do. I guess I should start from the beginning. Not the very beginning, but far enough back to explain how things got to where they are now. I'm the oldest of two kids. My younger sister, Layla, 31F, and I were raised in a middle-class suburb just outside a mid-sized city. Our parents, Marianne and Joel, were the kind of people who believed in structure, achievement, and image. They weren't the worst parents by any means, but their love had layers. Layers of expectations, comparisons, and what I can only describe as selective encouragement. From as early as I can remember, Layla was the project. My parents were always deeply invested in her potential. When she showed the slightest interest in painting at age 6, my mom enrolled her in private art classes. When she decided she liked ballet, they bought season tickets to the local ballet company and signed her up for lessons with the best teacher they could afford. Every hobby, every fleeting passion she expressed was treated like a sign of greatness waiting to blossom, something that just needed the right sunlight and water to thrive. I, on the other hand, liked quiet things. I read a lot. took apart old electronics. I was the kid who taught himself how to fix our family computer after a virus wiped it out, and I spent a whole summer learning how to code in BASIC just because I thought it was interesting. My parents were proud, sure, but it was never the same kind of excitement they had for Layla. Their compliments felt like nods of approval. Functional. Polite. Not full of the warmth and enthusiasm Layla always got. I remember this one Christmas when I was 12. I had spent weeks saving up my allowance to buy a kit that let you build your own radio. I stayed up late every night soldering parts together on the kitchen table. On Christmas morning, I gave it to my dad, told him I had built it from scratch, and it could actually pick up real stations. He smiled, nodded, and said, "That's nice, but..." Then he turned to Layla, who had drawn a few flowers with colored pencils on printer paper, and said, "Look at this talent. I swear, she's going to be something big." Stuff like that happened all the time. Subtle things, easy to miss. But they build up over time. You start to see the pattern. Now don't get me wrong, I don't hate my sister. Layla and I were actually pretty close when we were kids. She was bubbly and creative, always coming up with games for us to play. I looked out for her. I walked her to school, stood up for her when other kids picked on her, and even covered for her once when she snuck out to go to a friend's party in high school. But as we got older, the differences between us became harder to ignore. I went to a state university on a partial scholarship, worked part-time at a gas station to cover my expenses. I kept my head down, did what I had to do, and got my degree in computer science. It wasn't flashy, but it was steady. After graduation, I slowly worked my way up the IT ladder, entry-level support, then systems analyst, and eventually back-end development. It was a grind, but I didn't mind. Layla, meanwhile, bounced from one passion to the next. She enrolled in an arts program out of state, but dropped out after a year because she wasn't feeling inspired. My parents let her move back home. Then she went to a small liberal arts college, but left midway through the second semester after a breakup made her reevaluate everything. Again, my parents welcomed her home, paid off her remaining tuition, and converted the basement into a studio apartment so she could have space to grow. She got into photography for a while, then aromatherapy, then event planning. Now she runs a small online store selling handmade herbal bath salts and mood sprays. My parents still help her with bills, monthly, I think, and last year they loaned her money to invest in herself, which I later found out meant buying a new iPhone and a set of crystal bowls she uses for sound therapy sessions she hosts in her friend's backyard. But through all of this, they never stopped calling her brilliant. Even when she was 30 and jobless, they'd say, "Layla just needs the right opportunity," or "She was born to do something big." Meanwhile, when I got promoted, they said things like, "Well, you've always been dependable." Anyway, fast forward to about 6 weeks ago. I was offered a job at a fast-growing tech firm, a senior position with a major pay bump and some benefits that made me wonder if I was dreaming. I didn't apply. They found me through a former coworker and reached out directly. The interviews were intense, but I nailed them. When I got the offer, I felt, not proud exactly, just relieved. Like the years of quiet effort were finally worth something. Naturally, I told my parents. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a little excitement, some genuine happiness for me. We had dinner at their house the following Sunday. Layla was there too, of course, sitting cross-legged on the couch with one of her essential oil diffusers going in the corner. She'd named it Clarity Mist and was offering free samples to anyone who wanted to rebalance their emotional field. I told them about the new job after dessert. I kept it pretty low-key. Just said that I'd accepted the offer and would be starting next month. My mom's first question? What's the company called? Do they have anything creative? Like a branding team or maybe a wellness coordinator? Layla's been trying to get into something more aligned with her energy. I smiled politely. No, Mom. It's a back-end engineering role. Strictly tech. Layla leaned forward, her eyes lighting up. But don't they have anything flexible? Like, I don't know, maybe I could help them connect with their audience in a more organic way. I didn't know what that meant, so I just shrugged. That's when my dad spoke up. Well, Marcus, you've always had connections. Maybe you could recommend her for something there. You know how hard it's been for her lately. I looked at him, unsure how to respond. She's been trying so hard, my mom added. She just needs someone to open a door for her. You've already got your foot in. What's the harm in helping your sister? I tried to keep my voice calm. Mom, this isn't the kind of place. They're not hiring random roles, and even if they were, Layla doesn't have experience in this field. She can learn, my mom said firmly. She's got incredible people skills. People love her. All she needs is a chance. I glanced at Layla, who was still smiling like this whole thing made perfect sense. You're already set, Marcus, my dad said. But Layla, she needs this more than you do. That sentence landed like a rock in my chest. She needs this more than you do. They weren't just asking me to help. They were asking me to step aside. That night, I went home with a buzzing in my head I couldn't shake off. I didn't sleep. I kept hearing that sentence over and over again. After that dinner, things didn't settle down, they spiraled. At first, it was small things. My parents started calling me more frequently during work hours, which was odd because I had always been the one to keep the distance on those boundaries. They asked for updates on my new role, but the questions quickly shifted. Have you talked to Layla about the company yet? My mom asked one afternoon, her voice warm but with an undercurrent that made my skin crawl. I hesitated. No, Mom. I told you, the role is very technical. She wouldn't be a fit. Oh, Marcus, she sighed. You're so practical. But sometimes you have to think bigger. Bigger than just the job description. My dad joined in during another call. You don't owe Layla the job, but think about the family. Would it kill you to give her a chance? She's been through so much. I remember the phrase, so much, stuck out every time. I wasn't sure what so much meant exactly. Financial struggles? Emotional? Laziness? Because as far as I knew, she had been comfortably living at home, supported by them, with no visible urgency to fix anything. And then Layla herself started to get involved. She messaged me late one night, after I'd gone to bed but before I'd put my phone away. Marcus, I know you're busy with your fancy new job, but family is family. I just want to remind you I'm here. If you could just consider putting in a good word for me, it would mean everything. I'm ready to learn. I'm serious. I didn't respond. The next day, she texted again. Mom said you were cold yesterday. It hurts that you won't even give me a chance. Now, this wasn't just a simple sibling asking for help anymore. It felt like an accusation. Like I was the villain in this story. A villain in my own family's narrative. But the real tipping point came a week later. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a new message from my mom. We've been talking, Marcus. We all agree it would be best if you just recommend Layla for the job. She's your sister and family first, right? You've been so blessed with success. Don't let this pull you apart. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I took a deep breath and wrote back. Mom, I respect you and Dad, but this job is a technical role requiring years of experience and specific skills. I can't recommend someone unqualified just because she's family. It wouldn't be fair. To the company, to me, or to Layla. Her reply came almost instantly. Fair? Marcus, you don't owe anyone outside this family anything. You owe us loyalty. You've always had the opportunities because of us. If you can't see that, maybe you're the one who needs to rethink your priorities. That message hit harder than I expected. That evening, I went over to my parents' house to try to talk in person. I wanted to clear the air, to explain calmly that I couldn't help Layla in this way. As soon as I arrived, I was greeted not with warmth, but with icy stares. Layla was there, sitting in the living room with that same strange calm expression she always had when she was scheming something. My mom motioned for me to sit, but I could feel the weight of their combined scrutiny. We wanted to talk about the job, my dad said without preamble. I nodded. I told you I can't recommend Layla for a technical position she's unqualified for. My mom cut in, her tone sharp and impatient. Marcus, this isn't about qualifications. This is about family loyalty and trust. You have everything handed to you on a silver platter, but when it comes to Layla, you act like she's less deserving. I opened my mouth to respond, but Layla spoke first, and it was worse than anything my parents said. You don't get it, Marcus. Mom and Dad have always believed in me because I'm meant to succeed. You were just their safe bet. But now that you're successful, it's time you help bring me along. It's the right thing to do. Her words felt like an accusation and a command all at once. I swallowed hard. I don't think it's right to ask me to compromise my integrity for family loyalty. Layla laughed quietly, a cold sound. Integrity? You think your integrity means anything when it's just a job? It's a stepping stone. And you're blocking me. You're selfish. That was when I realized. This wasn't just a family asking for help. This was a power play. My parents and sister had created this story where I was supposed to be the dutiful brother, handing over my success so they could all shine, even if that meant ignoring reality, fairness, or my own boundaries. I left their house that night feeling hollow. After that night, when Layla showed up at my apartment uninvited, things felt like they crossed a line. She had this serene smile on her face, holding out a small pouch of crystals like a peace offering or a trap. She wanted me to open my heart to family, to forgiveness, to understanding, whatever phrase she thought would wear me down. I didn't take the crystals. I just nodded politely and said, "I'll think about it." Then I closed the door and locked it behind me. That was the moment I realized I had two choices: keep letting them walk all over me, or start standing up for myself. I chose the latter. But revenge, at least the kind that sticks, isn't about sudden explosions or dramatic confrontations. It's quiet, calculated, patient. So I started by paying closer attention. I watched my parents and Layla carefully over the next few weeks, taking mental notes of their habits, their attitudes, and where their vulnerabilities lay. First, there was my dad. He had this obsession with appearances. He wanted the perfect image of a successful family, two kids on upward trajectories, a lovely home, a respected social circle. His pride was wrapped up in how the world saw us. But beneath it all, he was terrified of failure. The idea that Layla might never truly make it gnawed at him. My mom was different. She was more manipulative, in a way you wouldn't expect. She spoke softly, smiled warmly, but her words always carried an unspoken demand. She used guilt as her weapon, reminding me of everything they'd done for me, the sacrifices, the support. And Layla? Well, she was the wild card, always charming people into seeing her as the misunderstood artist, the fragile soul who just needed a break. The more I observed, the more I realized that their entire dynamic was a house of cards. If I could pull just the right one, the whole thing might collapse. I started small. First, I sent an anonymous tip to the owner of Layla's little boutique candle store. I mentioned that some of the products were labeled as handmade, but that a friend had seen large shipments arriving from a third-party factory. It was vague enough to sound like a concerned customer, but it planted a seed of doubt. Next, I discreetly reached out to a few contacts I had in the local tech scene. I casually asked if they'd heard about any unusual practices at the company where Layla's healing workshops were being promoted. It turns out, the owner had been complaining quietly about Layla promising results that never came and people getting upset after attending her sessions. Then, I did something that felt a bit cruel but was necessary. I sent an email to my parents. Well, technically to my mom's email address, but blind copied to a few relatives I knew she wanted to impress about the situation. I framed it carefully, like I was worried about how their constant pressure on me might damage our family relationships, but also dropped hints about the financial strain Layla was causing and the rumors I'd heard about her business. The reaction was swift. My mom called me immediately, voice strained but sharp beneath the surface. "Marcus, why would you do that? We're family. You're tearing us apart." I stayed calm. "I'm not tearing us apart, Mom. You've been pushing me to sacrifice my own future for a fantasy you have about Layla. I'm trying to protect myself and maybe even help you see the truth." She didn't respond. Instead, Layla started messaging me again, this time with a tone that was less sweet and more demanding. "You think you're so clever? Maybe it's time you realize you're not the only one who can play this game." That's when I knew it was really on. But I had one more move to make before I showed my hand. I quietly contacted my HR department at my new job. I explained the situation, without naming names at first, but enough so they could be on the lookout for any attempts to use my position improperly. I made it clear that if Layla ever tried to leverage my name or ask for favors, it should be reported immediately. I even had a lawyer friend draft a letter I could send if things escalated, making it crystal clear I would not tolerate any harassment or misuse of my employment. Meanwhile, Layla's visits became more frequent. She'd show up at my door with that same smug smile, or send long texts about family loyalty and how I was breaking the circle. My parents, too, started to lean on other family members, painting me as the cold, ungrateful son who was willing to throw his sister under the bus for a paycheck. But I stayed steady. I refused to react emotionally. I held firm. And then, last week, everything came to a head. At a family gathering, my mom openly accused me of being jealous of Layla and her gifts. My dad hinted that I was selfish and unappreciative. Layla herself said, "If you really cared about this family, you'd do the right thing." I looked at all of them, each waiting for me to crumble, and I smiled. "I don't think I've been selfish," I said quietly, "but I do think it's time for some honesty." The room went silent. When I said, "It's time for some honesty," the whole room seemed to freeze. The air thickened with tension, and I felt like I was the only one breathing. Every eye was fixed on me, but I was no longer afraid. I let the silence hang for a moment before I began. For years, I was the quiet kid, the one who did what was expected, who didn't challenge the narrative. The safe bet. I watched as Layla was handed opportunity after opportunity, as mistakes were overlooked and excuses were made. I was the sibling who was told to work harder, be grateful, keep my head down. And my parents? They weren't just bystanders. They were the architects of this favoritism, this toxic dynamic that tried to guilt me into sacrificing my future for a fantasy they believed about Layla. My father shifted uneasily in his chair, avoiding my gaze. My mother's face was a mask of calm, but I caught the twitch of frustration in her jaw. Layla's smile faltered, and for a split second, vulnerability flashed behind her eyes. "I want to be clear about something," I continued, voice steady. "Layla's businesses, the candle store, the healing workshops, have been more about appearances than profit. I know that because I checked. I spoke to people who worked with her, customers who were disappointed, and I even sent a careful anonymous message to her boutique's landlord after hearing whispers about how she wasn't paying rent on time. I did this not out of malice, but because I'm tired of the lies that prop her up." I watched as their expressions darkened. My mom's polite facade cracked, revealing a flash of anger. "Mom, Dad," I said, turning to them, "you told me over and over that Layla needed this job more than I did. That because of some supposed destiny she had, she deserved my help and my sacrifices. But really, what you wanted was control. You wanted to make sure I stayed small, compliant, and easy to manipulate. You wanted me to give up my achievements so you could keep pretending everything was perfect. Well, I'm done with that game." The room grew colder. I could feel the weight of years of disappointment, entitlement, and unspoken resentment finally surfacing. Layla's voice broke the silence, sharp and bitter. "So, you're cutting us out? Just like that?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm cutting out the lies, the manipulation, and the entitlement that have been poisoning this family for far too long." There was silence again, heavier this time, filled with all the unspoken things that had built up over the years. That night, I left their house feeling something I hadn't in a long time: relief. The fallout was immediate but expected. My parents stopped inviting me to family dinners and gatherings. Calls went unanswered or were met with cold, clipped responses. The usual invitations to holiday events quietly stopped coming. Layla sent me one final message, a cold dagger wrapped in words. "You lost your family for nothing." But I didn't see it as a loss. I saw it as freedom. In the weeks and months that followed, I focused on myself. The pressure to be the perfect son, the dutiful brother, lifted like a weight. I threw myself into my work, earned another promotion, and started mentoring young professionals, something I never imagined I could do in a family so wrapped up in appearances. I rebuilt my own sense of self, not through my parents' validation but through my own efforts and the respect of people who valued me for who I am. I made new friends, people who weren't tangled up in family politics or expectations. And for the first time, I felt like I was living life on my own terms. Reflecting back, it's clear now that my family's version of success was never really about achievement or happiness. It was about control, appearances, and entitlement. My parents wanted to keep Layla as the golden child, while trying to make me feel guilty for wanting something real, something earned. Layla, for all her charm and smiles, thrived on drama and manipulation. She was a master at turning sympathy into power, and I was their convenient scapegoat. But I refused to be that anymore. I haven't forgiven them, and honestly, I don't think I will. Forgiveness feels like erasing the years of gaslighting, favoritism, and emotional exhaustion. I'm not interested in pretending things are okay when they're not. I've accepted that some people can't see past their own desires and fears, and that sometimes the healthiest choice is to walk away. Now, I focus on building a life where I don't have to sacrifice my values or my dignity to keep the peace. I've learned to trust my own judgment and to recognize when loyalty becomes a chain. So here I am today, free from the burden of their expectations, no longer their safe bet, but someone who's forged a path on his own terms. It's not perfect. There are still wounds, and there's still healing. But it's real, and that's more than I ever had before. My parents sold the land I secretly bought to build my dream home, saying, "Family comes first, your sister needs it more." I just nodded, knowing they'd just fallen right in my trap. Hi Reddit. My name's Elias, 42M, and this story still feels surreal to even write down. Some days I wake up and think, did that really happen? Did they actually do that to me? But then I step outside and see what's left of the dream I spent over a decade building. And the answer is always yes. Yes, they did. I've seen a lot of stories on here about entitled parents, manipulative siblings, and quiet revenge that took years to bloom. I never thought I'd be living one myself. But here we are. Let me take you back a bit, because none of this will make sense unless you understand the people involved. I grew up in a small town in the Pacific Northwest, one of those places where everyone knows your name and what kind of cereal you eat. My parents, Ruth and Gerald, were what I'd call presentation people. They cared a lot, and I mean a lot, about how we looked from the outside. Always said the right things at church, never missed a community event, had perfect seasonal decorations and matching family outfits for every photo. But when the doors closed and the guests were gone, it was a different story. My younger sister Dana, 38F, was always the star of the show. Cheerleader, honor student, homecoming queen. Every time she accomplished something, even the smallest thing, it was a full production. My mom would send out little family updates to her friends that read like a press release. Dana got a B+ on a math test? Let's all go out for dinner. Elias won a regional woodworking contest? Oh, that's nice, dear. Don't forget to put the tools away. It wasn't that they were outright cruel to me, at least not back then. It was more like neglect by comparison. Dana's needs, dreams, and feelings were always the center of gravity in our house. Mine were orbiting Pluto, if they were acknowledged at all. I wasn't a troublemaker. I kept to myself, did well enough in school, and started working young. I discovered woodworking in high school, not the kind you do in shop class just to pass, but the real stuff. Carving, framing, timber joinery. There was something deeply satisfying about turning raw material into something solid, something useful. I stuck with it. Apprenticed under a master carpenter for 5 years, then eventually opened my own small business in my late 20s. Nothing flashy, just custom work, furniture, decks, small builds. My hands paid my bills, and I liked it that way. Meanwhile, Dana married a guy named Greg when she was 23. He was in software, the kind of guy who wore expensive sneakers and always talked like he was pitching something. They moved to California and started their picture-perfect life. 3 kids, golden retriever, endless social media posts about homemade smoothies and family hikes. My parents practically floated every time they visited. They'd always say things like, "You know, Dana and Greg are really making something of themselves," while I stood there covered in sawdust, drinking from a thermos between job sites. I'm not trying to paint myself as some martyr or anything. I chose my path, and I was content with it. But over time, the distance between how my parents treated Dana and how they treated me stopped feeling like a difference and started feeling like a statement. About 5 years ago, I started dreaming about building a house. Not just any house, my house. I'd been renting for years and socking away money. I didn't want a mansion or anything fancy, just something thoughtful. A home that felt like it belonged to me. I sketched plans in the evenings, sometimes while sitting on the porch with Jasper, my golden mix, and watching the sunset behind the tree line. It became more than a plan, it became a goal, a symbol of what I'd built for myself, without anyone's help. 2 years ago, I found the land. 3 acres just outside town, mostly flat, bordered by forest on one side and a quiet creek on the other. The seller was an older couple downsizing to be closer to their grandkids. We hit it off. I didn't even try to negotiate hard. It felt right, and I wanted them to feel good about who they were selling to. I bought it quietly, through an LLC I'd set up under my business. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest friend. I wanted it to be mine, from the first nail to the last coat of paint. I spent a full year preparing, surveying, zoning research, checking soil drainage, getting easements in place. It was a slow process, the kind of thing you don't rush if you want to get it right. Every weekend, I'd drive out there, sometimes with Jasper, sometimes alone. I'd just walk the land, imagining where the porch would go, how the sun would fall through the trees in the morning, where the garden beds would be planted. I was planning to surprise my parents with the news once the foundation was in. I even had this silly idea of bringing them out to the site with blindfolds, like one of those home makeover shows. I guess, deep down, a part of me still wanted that recognition. The look on their faces when they realized I'd built something meaningful without them lifting a finger. But things didn't go that way. It started small, as it always does. Around the holidays last year, Dana and her family came back to town. She showed up late to Christmas dinner, She always does, wearing a long coat and a slightly too bright smile. Greg wasn't with her, which was odd, but no one said anything at first. During dessert, she made an announcement. I've decided we're moving back, she said, her voice a little too high, a little too fast. The Bay Area is just not the right place for us anymore. My mom practically burst into tears. My dad looked like someone had just handed him a winning lottery ticket. Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful. We've missed you so much. This is where you belong. Where will you live? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Dana hesitated. Well, we haven't figured that part out yet. Houses here are expensive. And, well, things have been a little tight lately. She didn't go into detail, but you could feel it in the room. Something had gone wrong. Greg's job, maybe. Their savings. Something. My parents didn't ask questions, which meant they already knew. We'll figure it out, my mom said, reaching across the table to pat Dana's hand. Family takes care of each other. I didn't think much of it at the time. Figured she'd rent something, or maybe even move in with mom and dad for a while. But a few weeks later, I got a call that changed everything. It was my dad. He sounded upbeat, like he was calling to chat about the weather. Elias, can you come by the house this weekend? Your mom and I want to talk to you about something. It's important. I should have known right then that something was off. But I didn't. I said sure. I showed up. I walked into a living room that smelled like lemon polish and tension. My mom was sitting straight-backed on the couch, hands folded like she was about to deliver a speech. My dad stood by the fireplace, rocking slightly on his heels. Dana was there, too. She smiled when I came in, but it didn't reach her eyes. I sat down, and then my mom said the words that froze me in place. We heard you bought some land. My mother said it lightly, like she was commenting on the weather or asking if I'd remembered to pick up milk. But I heard the edge behind it, the quiet tension in her voice, the careful way she avoided looking at me too directly. I looked at her, then at my father, and then at Dana, who was pretending to inspect her fingernails like this had nothing to do with her. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat there, slow blinking, trying to piece together how they could have found out. I hadn't told a soul. Not even my closest friend, not my neighbors, not even Jasper. And he's the best secret keeper I know. The only people who knew were me, the seller, and a clerk at the county land office. Small town. All it would take was the wrong person seeing the LLC paperwork and recognizing my business name. That was on me. I'd underestimated just how many people my parents were still connected to. Must have slipped through the grapevine, my dad added, as if that explained it. He smiled, but there was something behind it. Not warmth. Not pride. Something closer to satisfaction. Like he'd caught me doing something I wasn't supposed to. I nodded slowly. I did. My mom clapped her hands once, almost like she was performing. Well, that's just wonderful, Elias. We had no idea you were looking for land. Why didn't you say anything? The tone made it clear that this wasn't actually a compliment. It was a warning. You did something big without our permission. My parents have always operated under a quiet, unwritten rule. If it wasn't part of the family discussion, it didn't count. And I'd broken that rule in a big way. I wanted to wait until I had something to show for it. I said, as evenly as I could. It was kind of a personal project. My mother's face shifted. The corners of her mouth curled into something that looked like a smile, but her eyes stayed cold. Personal projects are lovely. But when you're part of a family, big decisions affect everyone. There it was. That word again. Family. Whenever they brought up family, it meant someone, usually me, was about to be asked to give something up. I'd heard it before. Family needs you to take Dana to dance practice. Family comes first. Elias, just let your sister have the last of the money for her trip. She needs it more. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Not quite anger. Not yet. Just that slow, creeping sense that I was about to be pushed aside again, and that they'd already decided it was justified. We were thinking, my dad began, stepping forward, that maybe this land you bought could serve a bigger purpose. Something that would benefit everyone. Everyone? I asked. He nodded. Dana and the kids are going to need a place to live. Something stable. A good school district. Space for the little ones. Your land? Well, it's practically perfect. I said nothing. I just stared at him. And since it's not developed yet, my mom continued, this could be a real blessing. A fresh start for your sister's family. Dana finally looked up. Her expression was unreadable. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look grateful, either. She looked like someone waiting for a flight, vaguely bored, tapping the edge of her cup with one nail. My father cleared his throat again, like he was easing into a final point. We've already talked to Greg. They're on board. Dana's going to take care of the house plans, just something modest, of course. And we've gone ahead and spoken to the county. It's all doable. I felt the air leave the room. You what? My voice came out quieter than I expected. Almost too calm. My mother blinked at me like I'd just asked a silly question. We moved quickly because the opportunity was time-sensitive. There was a grant for new residential development that Dana might qualify for, but it required proof of ownership. So we expedited things. Expedited. I repeated, slowly. My dad gave me a patronizing smile. You've had the land for almost a year, son, and you haven't built anything yet. It's just sitting there. We thought it was time to put it to good use. I stared at them, trying to process the magnitude of what they were telling me. They weren't asking for the land. They had already taken it. Behind my back. Without a conversation. Without a request. They had moved papers, spoken to officials, made decisions, all under the assumption that my silence would be agreement. How did you even? I trailed off, realizing the answer before I finished the question. The clerk. That's how they got access to the deed. Someone at the office must have tipped them off when my mother asked one of her curious questions. It would have taken one phone call. And if they saw it was owned by my business, not under my personal name, they would have assumed I was just holding it. Like it was an investment. Something negotiable. Elias, my mother said softly, placing her hand over mine on the table. Try to understand. Dana's going through a hard time. Her husband's business failed. They lost almost everything. The children have been through enough. You have no dependents. No obligations. You'll be fine. I slowly pulled my hand away from hers. I bought that land with my own money, I said. I've been planning that home for years. But it's not about you, she replied, and the way she said it, calm, reasonable, final, made my blood run cold. That was the moment. Right there. The turning point. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. They had chosen, once again, to treat me as a footnote in my own life story. Because Dana needed it more. Because family comes first. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but steady. I understand, I said quietly. My mother beamed, clearly thinking she'd gotten through to me. Good, she said. I knew you'd come around. You've always been so level-headed. I smiled, but not because I agreed. I smiled because I had planned for this. Because I knew what they were capable of. Because the land they thought they had claimed, the one they were so sure they could use to launch Dana's new life, wasn't as simple as they believed. And while they were busy congratulating themselves on another win for the family, they hadn't realized the trap they just walked straight into. The drive home that night was quiet. Too quiet. Even Jasper, usually bouncing with energy whenever I got back in the truck, stayed still in the passenger seat. He must have felt it, the shift. Something had broken in that living room. Something I didn't realize had been fragile until it snapped. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't hit the steering wheel or call someone to vent. I just drove. Slow and steady. The kind of drive where your hands move automatically, but your mind is miles away, combing through every word that was said, looking for something you missed. But I hadn't missed anything. They'd gone behind my back, made legal decisions about my property, and handed it over to my sister like it was a coat I wasn't wearing. Because she needed it more. Because family comes first. The truth is, I'd seen something like this coming years ago, not exactly this, but something. That's why I set everything up the way I did. Let me explain. When I bought the land, I didn't do it in my name. I created an LLC, a limited liability company, under my carpentry business. Nothing shady, just practical. I'd seen too many small-time builders get stuck in legal messes when zoning or property disputes arose, especially in towns where personal connections often blurred lines. I wanted a buffer. Something that made it clear, this land was part of my livelihood. Not a hobby. Not a whim. The LLC had its own address, separate from my home. Its own contact info. And more importantly, its own ownership structure. What my parents didn't know, and what no one in my family had ever cared enough to ask, was that I'd taken out a construction lien on the land almost immediately after purchase. I'd done it through a small local bank where my friend Celeste worked. She and I had gone to school together. She knew my work, trusted me, and helped me file everything the right way. So while my parents had managed to speak with someone at the county clerk's office and probably convinced them I'd just bought the land as an investment, they didn't know about the lien, or the construction permits I'd quietly filed over the winter, or the small foundation markers I'd installed last month when I thought no one was watching. which meant one thing, and one thing only. They didn't own the land. Not legally. At best, they had a flimsy claim through some unauthorized transfer or forged document, likely brokered through someone they knew. At worst, they had nothing at all and had just told me, in full confidence, that they were building a house on property that didn't belong to them. So I nodded, smiled, and drove home. Because now I had everything I needed, and I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. Instead, I started pulling strings. The next morning, I paid a visit to Celeste at the bank. I brought coffee and muffins and my paperwork. She raised an eyebrow when I walked in. "Is it happening?" she asked. I just nodded. Celeste had always been sharp. She knew from the start that I had family complications, and she'd helped me structure things in a way that gave me control, no matter what was going on around me. We spent an hour going over documents. She reviewed the lien, the construction permits, the zoning approvals. Everything was still in order. "You're lucky," she said at one point. "If they'd waited just a few more weeks, they might have actually complicated this. But right now, you've got them in a corner." I didn't smile. I wasn't happy about any of it. I just felt steady. "Can we put a hold on any development applications under my name?" I asked. "Already done," she replied. "And I'll put a notification flag in the system. If anyone tries to pull additional permits for that lot, you'll get an alert." Perfect. That was step one. Step two was a little more delicate. I reached out to a friend of mine from the county zoning board, a guy named Patrick. I'd done some barn renovation work for a couple years back. He owed me a favor. Nothing serious. Just the kind of favor where someone makes sure your paperwork doesn't mysteriously go missing. We met for lunch at a quiet diner just off the highway. I showed him a copy of the deed transfer that my parents had tried to push through. His brow furrowed immediately. "This is messy," he said. "Looks like someone pulled some strings. Probably used your family name to smooth it out." I figured. "I can flag it," he said. "Start an inquiry. Once there's a review on the parcel, they won't be able to break ground without it being cleared." Good. He hesitated. "This going to cause a family war?" "It already has." After lunch, I drove back out to the land. I parked by the tree line and walked the property slowly, taking it all in. I could see tire tracks where someone had been out here recently. Maybe Dana. Maybe Greg. Maybe my dad with a tape measure and a big dream that didn't belong to him. I walked past the markers I'd planted, past the small wooden stake where I'd planned the corner of my front porch. I stood there for a long time, listening to the wind in the trees. They tried to take this from me, but they had no idea what it was actually worth. Not just the money, the years, the vision, the work. And now they were going to learn something about me they never bothered to find out. I don't raise my voice. I don't throw things. I build. Carefully. Quietly. With purpose. And when I take something apart, I make sure it can't be put back together. But this was just the beginning. Because before I reclaimed what was mine, I needed to let them go just a little further, just enough rope to tangle themselves. And they were about to do exactly that. The next few weeks were quiet. Too quiet. My parents stopped calling. Dana didn't text. No follow-ups, no family dinners, no check-ins. At first, it might have seemed like they were giving me space. But I knew better. They weren't waiting out a storm. They were busy. Planning. Drawing up blueprints. Lining up contractors. Probably sitting around my parents' kitchen table, heads bowed like generals over a map, designing a future that didn't belong to them. So I waited too. I watched the county website for any permit filings. I got 2 email alerts within 10 days. One for a residential development proposal on my parcel. Another for an electrical installation request. Both submitted under the name Dana Whitmore. They were moving fast, but I was faster. I sent everything I'd gathered to Patrick at the zoning board and Celeste at the bank, the lien, the LLC records, the foundation markers, the original permit applications, and a notarized affidavit confirming no sale or transfer of the property had ever been authorized by me. That's when the real dominoes started to fall. First, the county flagged the parcel as under dispute. Then, the permit applications were denied. And finally, I received a call from the sheriff's office, not because I was in trouble, but because someone had reported a land ownership conflict on private property. My parents had apparently sent a contractor out to the lot to do preliminary soil work, and I had every legal right to shut it down. So I did. I met the crew at the lot myself, paperwork in hand. Jasper sat beside me in the truck, watching intently like he knew this was the moment everything changed. The foreman stepped out of his pickup, confused. "You the owner?" "Yes." Someone else said, "Here, I interrupted, handing him a copy of the deed and the lien documents. They were mistaken. This land isn't for sale, and it's not available for development by anyone else. You're trespassing. He nodded slowly. Understood. Sorry about the mix-up. They packed up and left without another word. I didn't go home. I went to my parents' house. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't even nervous. I was ready. My father opened the door, saw my face, and for the first time in a very long while, maybe ever, he looked unsure of himself. Elias, he said. We were going to call no, I said firmly, stepping inside. You weren't. You thought I'd just roll over. Again. My mother came in from the kitchen, her smile brittle. What's this about now? You know Dana needs this, Elias. You've had that land for over a year, and it's mine, I said. And it was never yours to take. Dana appeared at the top of the stairs, phone in hand, probably already halfway through a text to Greg. Her face turned a shade paler when she saw me. You went behind my back, I continued. You used my name, forged documents, filed false permits, and tried to take something I worked for without even asking. My father frowned. You're being dramatic. No, I said, louder this time. I'm being done. I pulled a thick folder from my bag and dropped it on their dining table. That's a copy of everything. The lien, the permits, the zoning correspondence, and the cease and desist letter from my attorney. You got a lawyer involved? My mother gasped. Yes, because you made this legal. You crossed that line the moment you filed paperwork without my knowledge. This isn't a family disagreement anymore. It's theft. You're overreacting, Dana muttered. It's just land. It's not like you live there. I turned toward her slowly. And that's exactly why you'll never understand. There was silence. Thick, suffocating silence. I looked around the room, the same room where every major decision in my life had been questioned, challenged, or undermined. I remembered the time they told me college was a waste of money, the time they pushed me to give Dana my savings after her honeymoon budget ran dry, the birthdays where she got trips and I got socks. I remembered it all, and I realized I didn't owe them anything anymore. Not explanations, not apologies, not a place in my life. I'm done, I said calmly. I'm cutting contact. My mother stepped forward, alarmed. Elias, don't be rash. I'm not being rash. I'm setting a boundary. You tried to erase me from my own future. That's not family. That's control. I've built a life you don't understand, and now you're not going to be part of it. Dana crossed her arms. So what? You're just going to walk away? I already did. You just never noticed. And with that, I turned and walked out. That was 9 months ago. Since then, I finished construction on my home. It's not grand or flashy, but it's exactly what I wanted. Sturdy, peaceful, surrounded by trees. I added a small workshop out back where I build furniture during the day and a screened porch where I sit with Jasper in the evenings. The sun rises behind the ridge, and sometimes the fog rolls in just slow enough to make the world feel like it's starting over. I haven't heard from my parents. They sent a single letter 2 months after everything fell apart. It was a mix of passive regret and quiet blame. They said they wish things could have gone differently and that I should remember that family is forever. I didn't reply, because they were right. Family can be forever, but only if it's built on respect. And mine wasn't. I haven't spoken to Dana either. From what I've heard through town gossip, she and Greg moved in with his parents while they searched for another place. I'm not gloating. I'm not celebrating their hardship, but I won't apologize for protecting what's mine. This land, this home, was the first thing I ever truly built for myself. And now it's the foundation of something stronger, a life without them. And peace that doesn't need anyone's permission. At my brother's wedding, I paid for the flowers and took care of the guests. When I asked about my plus one, he smirked and said, "You're not family, you're just the help." The room laughed. I swallowed it. What happened after that changed everything. Now he's blowing up my phone, screaming, "You ruined everything." Hi Reddit. I'm 38M, and this story still makes my stomach twist when I think about it. I've been replaying every moment in my head for weeks, wondering if there was a point where I could have stepped back, drawn a line, or just said no, but I didn't. And now? Now my phone won't stop ringing, and my brother is telling anyone who'll listen that I destroyed the most important day of his life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. My younger brother, Nolan, 35M, got married recently to a woman named Celeste. We didn't grow up dreaming about each other's weddings or sharing deep, emotional talks. Nolan and I were different from the start. He was the kind of kid who could charm his way through anything. He'd flash a smile, make a joke, and somehow the adults would forget all about whatever trouble he'd caused. Me? I was quieter, more observant. I liked books, kept to myself, and I was close to our grandmother more than anyone else in the family. Our parents always made it clear that Nolan was the special one. I don't think they meant to pit us against each other. It was more subtle than that. Nolan was just adored, and I was dependable, the one who could be left out a little, because they knew I'd still be there. I moved out when I was 18 and built a quiet but stable life. I have a good job in logistics, a partner I adore, Micah, 36M. We've been together 5 years, and a small but close circle of friends. I visit home for holidays and check in on my parents every now and then. Nolan and I kept in touch, though it was mostly surface level. Birthdays, the occasional message, a few scattered hangouts when we happened to be in the same town. So when he called me one Sunday evening and told me he was engaged, I congratulated him sincerely. I didn't know Celeste well, but I'd met her a couple of times. She struck me as polite but calculated. Like every word she said had been reviewed in her head first, then softened to just the right tone. Not warm, but not cold. Somewhere in between. Hey, Nolan had said on that call, I know it's a little early, but I could really use your help. Celeste is going over the budget and losing her mind. Would you be okay helping with some of the logistics? You're so organized with this kind of stuff. I hesitated. What do you mean by help? Just a few things. Coordinating with vendors, answering questions, helping with guest transportation, nothing crazy. You've always been the reliable one. He said it like it was a compliment. I agreed, partly because I thought it might be nice to feel included, partly because that word, reliable, still stuck to me like gum on the bottom of my shoe. What started as just a few things quickly grew into something else entirely. Within a few weeks, I was managing spreadsheets with guest information, organizing airport pickups, reviewing floral proposals, and calling vendors to confirm schedules. At some point, Nolan asked if I could handle the flowers entirely, meaning pay for them. We'll pay you back, he said quickly, like he knew how that sounded. It's just, our budget got tighter than we expected, and you always said you liked floral arrangements, right? I had said that years ago, during a family dinner. I'd mentioned how I appreciated the way flowers could bring a space to life. Apparently, that offhand comment had earned me the job of flower sponsor. I ended up covering the full cost, $3,200 to be exact. I didn't complain. Not yet. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of early morning phone calls and late-night checklists. Nolan and Celeste were almost entirely hands-off by that point. Celeste would occasionally text me a list of small things she needed: candles for the centerpieces, extra lanterns, biodegradable confetti, program designs. She never asked. She just assumed I'd do it. I started to feel more like a planner than a guest. And yet, I told myself it was fine. It was Nolan's big day, and I could handle it. Then came the week of the wedding. Guests started arriving from out of town. Nolan asked if I could be the point person for pickups and check-ins. So I was the one making sure the grandparents got their keys at the hotel, the cousins knew which shuttle to take, and Aunt Lena had her lactose-free meal arranged. I didn't see much of Nolan or Celeste that week. When I did, it was brief, usually them hurrying off to some appointment or dinner. Finally, the night before the wedding, I checked the finalized seating chart for the reception. It was my last task before getting some much-needed rest. That's when I saw it. My name was there, yes, but it was at the edge of table 8, near the back of the hall. Not with immediate family, not with my parents, and nowhere near Micah's name. In fact, Micah's name wasn't there at all. I stared at the list for a long time, thinking maybe it had been an oversight. I texted Nolan, just a quick message. Hey, quick question. Micah's name isn't on the seating chart. Was that a mistake? He didn't answer. The next morning, I found him outside the venue, going over last-minute details with the photographer. I waited until they were done, and then approached. Hey, I said, trying to sound casual. About the seating chart, Micah's name isn't on it. Is he still good to come? Nolan barely looked up. He gave a little smirk and said, yeah, about that. Celeste and I decided to keep it family only at the main tables. Hope that's cool. I blinked. But Micah is family. We've been together for 5 years. You know that. He shrugged. I mean, look, you've been super helpful and we really appreciate it. But let's be honest, you've mostly been, like, coordinating everything, right? Handling the logistics. You've basically been the help. The way he said it, like it was the most normal thing in the world, made my skin crawl. I felt my ears burning, but I couldn't seem to find my voice. Then, as if to hammer the point in deeper, one of the groomsmen nearby chuckled and said, "Yeah, man, you've been crushing it. Every bride needs a personal assistant." And they laughed. They laughed. Like I was just some extra in their movie, there to serve snacks and adjust the lighting. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I nodded like it was fine. I texted Micah and told him to skip it. Made up some excuse about a mix-up. He didn't ask questions. He just said he understood. That was the worst part. And yet, I stayed. I smiled through the ceremony. Helped the caterers adjust the setup when the wind picked up. Sat through the toasts, even when Nolan's best man described him as the rock of the family, always the one to keep everything together. And I kept my silence until I heard what Celeste said in the hallway. After dinner was over and the dance floor started filling up with swaying couples and toddlers running between heels, I slipped away. I needed a minute. Maybe two. I wasn't sure if it was the long hours, the countless errands, or that awful moment with the seating chart, but something in me had started to fray. There was a narrow hallway just past the restrooms that led to the catering area and staff exit. I went there to be alone, not to eavesdrop. But I heard her voice before I even turned the corner. Celeste. Her tone was lighter than usual, casual in a way I hadn't heard before. Not careful, not rehearsed. Almost giddy. She was speaking to someone. Later I'd realize it was her sister, Laurel. At the time, I just stood frozen, half in shadow, listening to my brother's new wife talk about me. "I'm honestly relieved we stuck him at the back," she said with a little laugh. Nolan kept insisting we had to include him, and I'm like, why? He's not really part of the family dynamic. He doesn't even match the aesthetic. There was a pause. Then Laurel replied, "Well, you did pay for the flowers." Celeste snorted. "Exactly. That's why we didn't cut him out completely. I mean, come on. If he wants to pretend he's part of things, let him." But Nolan and I agree he's more useful behind the scenes. My breath caught in my throat. Useful. Not loved. Not appreciated. Just useful. I backed away quietly, unnoticed, trying to keep my face neutral as I passed other guests. I didn't want anyone asking if I was okay. I didn't want to explain. I just needed air. I stepped outside to the side patio, where string lights cast a soft glow over the stone walls. A few people milled around, talking, but no one noticed me. I found a bench near the edge and sat, gripping my phone like it could anchor me. I must have sat there for 15 minutes, maybe more. I thought about Micah, how I'd told him not to come. About my parents, who hadn't even asked where I'd been seated. About every list I'd made, every phone call I'd taken, every part of this wedding I'd quietly, patiently managed. And I thought about what Nolan had said. "You're just the help." I don't know what switched inside me. Maybe it wasn't a switch. Maybe it was a slow boil, something that had been simmering since we were kids, and he got praise for a science fair project I'd helped him build. Or when he crashed my first car and my parents told me not to make a fuss because he was going through a lot. But something solidified in that moment. I stood up and went back inside. The rest of the night moved like a dream. I smiled at a few distant relatives, helped an elderly guest find her misplaced wrap, and made a few polite goodbyes. I don't think anyone noticed me slipping away again, this time heading not for air, but for the room where all the extra decor, supplies, and personal belongings were being stored. The plan that formed in my head wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, thoughtful, and maybe a little poetic. I opened the storage room door and flicked on the light. There they were, the untouched extras, the flower arrangements we'd ordered in surplus, the guest book table items, the handmade signs, the additional pieces I'd paid for, arranged, and kept out of sight for the setup crew to rotate in the next morning for brunch. I looked at it all. The careful organization, the tags with my handwriting, the schedule I'd typed and laminated. And I started packing, not in anger, not messily, just methodically. The entire time, I kept replaying their voices in my head. He's more useful behind the scenes. I didn't touch anything that didn't belong to me or wasn't arranged through my account. But what I had paid for, what I had sourced, selected, and delivered, I took back. By the time I left that room, 2 floral carts, 2 crates of specialty decor, and several hand-detailed pieces were quietly loaded into my car in the back lot. I didn't make a scene. No shouting. No confrontation. I was simply reclaiming what I had contributed. And that was just the beginning. Because what came next wasn't planned, but it unfolded in a way that even I couldn't have predicted. The calls started the next morning. Then the texts. By the end of the day, Nolan had left 3 voicemails in a row. each one more frantic than the last. And then came the final message, loud and crackling with fury. You ruined everything. And the best part? I hadn't even told them why yet. After I left the wedding venue that night, I drove the crates and floral carts back to my place. I'd originally planned to drop them at Micah's studio space. He's an interior designer and has a room just for temporary storage, but something about having them with me felt right. Like bringing pieces of my dignity home. I didn't touch them that night. I didn't need to. I already knew Nolan and Celeste would wake up to a venue that didn't look quite like the dream they'd carefully curated on social media. No entry arch, no personalized thank you board at the exit, no overflowing florals at the brunch table. Subtle things, yes, but noticeable, especially for someone like Celeste, who had insisted on branding every corner of the wedding weekend. But it was what came next that took this from silent protest to, well, something more deliberate. The morning after the wedding, I checked my phone to find a message from Celeste. Celeste, 8:12 a.m. Hi, I think there's been a mix-up. The brunch setup is missing a lot of items. I assume they were moved? Let me know, thanks. No greeting. No apology. Just an assumption that I was still on call. Still to help. I didn't answer. I went for a walk instead. Took my time. Breathed. By the time I got back, I had 3 more texts. 1 from Nolan, 2 from her. Still no acknowledgement of what had been said to me. No question of how I was, or why I'd left early. Just demands. Then a message came from my mother. Mom, 11:23 a.m. honey. There's a bit of chaos at the brunch. Nolan says some things are missing. Can you check in with the team you used? That one hit harder. Not because she was angry, but because it confirmed something I already suspected. Nolan hadn't told her what he said to me. He didn't mention the just the help comment or the seating chart or how I'd been spoken about like a hired hand. No, he only told her what would make him the victim. I stared at that message for a long time before I replied. Me, 11:40 a.m. I'll speak to Nolan directly. And I did. I waited until the day after the brunch. I wanted time to cool down, to be measured. I wanted my words to come out clean, not like fire, but like ice. We met at a quiet coffee shop. Neutral ground. I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes the moment I walked in. He tried to smile, but it wavered. Hey, he said, standing awkwardly. I sat down without returning the greeting. He followed. So, he said, fiddling with his napkin. Listen, Celeste is pretty upset. I think some of the vendors got confused or something. You usually keep a pretty tight ship, so I figured. I cut in. I heard what she said. His mouth snapped shut. I was in the hallway. I continued. The night of the wedding. I heard every word. He shifted, opened his mouth, closed it again. You've always known how to charm your way through things, I said, calm and even. Even as a kid, you knew how to make a mess and then let someone else quietly clean it up. That someone was usually me. And I let it happen, Nolan, over and over. Because I thought maybe if I just stayed reliable, I'd finally be treated like more than a background character in my own family. His eyes dropped to the table. But the truth is, I went on, I didn't ruin anything. You did. And Celeste did. With your words, your choices, and your entitlement. He finally looked at me. It was a joke. No, I said. It was who you really are when no one's watching. And now I see it clearly. I stood up. By the way, I didn't take anything that didn't belong to me. I paid for the decor, the arrangements, the signage. They were never yours to claim. He blinked. So you're just keeping them? I donated most of it yesterday, I said. Micah's firm is staging a community event for local youth centers. They were thrilled to take the pieces off my hands. Said it made the place feel warm, like someone cared. He didn't respond. He just stared at me, like he was waiting for me to laugh or soften or backpedal. But I didn't. Instead, I left him there. I thought that would be the end of it. That they'd lick their wounds, find new ways to twist the story to make themselves the victims, and quietly move on. I was wrong. Because 2 days later, my cousin sent me a message. Cousin Elsie, 9:02 p.m. Hey, have you seen the Facebook post? I didn't even have to ask what Facebook post Elsie was talking about. I clicked on the notification, and there it was, Nolan's public post. Nolan, 6:47 p.m. Last night's wedding was supposed to be a dream come true, but I'm still reeling from the shocking betrayal of a close family member. After all the hard work and sacrifice that went into making this day perfect, someone I thought I could count on decided to take things into their own hands. This person decided to steal from our celebration, leaving key decorations, and items missing. I won't name names, but it's heartbreaking that someone so close to us could try to ruin such a special day. We're heartbroken by this betrayal. There was a picture of the reception, some of the tables empty where the floral arrangements should have been. Underneath, in the comments, there were messages of support and sympathy. His friends, who I barely knew, were chiming in with things like, "What a shame, Nolan," or "So sorry, man, hope it gets resolved." And, of course, my mother had already commented, all concerned, asking if we should call the police. I froze, staring at the post, my hand trembling on the phone. But then I noticed something. One of the comments wasn't from a stranger. It was from Celeste. She had tagged me, calling me out by name. "Celeste, 7:01 p.m. We all know who you are, and we know what you did. You've made things so much harder for us, and it's just disappointing. You should be ashamed of yourself." My heart pounded in my chest. She was playing the victim in front of everyone. They were both rewriting the story, painting me as the thief, the villain, as if I was the one who had taken from them. But I wasn't going to let it slide. Not this time. Not anymore. I took a deep breath and set my phone down, thinking. The more I thought, the clearer the plan became. I knew that if I responded in anger, if I tried to fight them on their level, it would only make me look guilty. I needed to expose what had really happened. I needed to turn the story around, and I needed proof. I'd kept every receipt, every email correspondence, and every bank statement from the wedding. The decorations, the flowers, the specialty signs, all of it was paid for through my accounts, and I had all the evidence to back it up. They had no claim to it. I had made the arrangements, I had sourced the vendors, and I had footed the bill. I pulled out my laptop and began drafting a public post of my own, carefully choosing my words. I wasn't about to stoop to their level, but I wasn't going to let them slander me either. Me, 9:15 p.m. to all those commenting on Nolan's post, I want to clarify a few things. Yes, I made significant contributions to this wedding, including the flowers and decor. These were paid for by me, and I arranged the delivery and setup, as I had done many times before for the family. If items were missing from the event, it was not due to any intentional wrongdoing on my part. I chose to reclaim what was rightfully mine, as I was neither thanked nor respected for my efforts. I have receipts, records, and confirmation emails to show that I did not steal anything. I went on to explain how I had been quietly excluded, how I had been treated like an afterthought despite the time and money I had invested in the event. I detailed how they had called me just to help, and how, in the end, they expected me to silently contribute and disappear into the background. I included links to photos of the floral arrangements, the event plans, and the receipts, every bit of proof I could gather. I didn't hold back. After hitting post, I stared at the screen. I knew this would escalate. I knew it would cause a stir, and I was ready for the fallout. Within minutes, the comments flooded in. Nolan called me immediately, his voice trembling with rage. "You had to air it all out publicly, didn't you?" he shouted, his words clipped and venomous. "You're ruining the family, again. Why can't you just leave things alone?" I didn't shout back. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "I'm done being the scapegoat, Nolan. You've made your bed. Now lie in it." But it didn't end with him. The post went viral within our family circle. It was shared between relatives, a few even tagging my mother in it, questioning why she hadn't stood up for me sooner. It was like a slow-moving wave that swept through the entire family. The next few days were a blur. Celeste and Nolan went silent. They deleted their posts, but the damage had already been done. I started receiving messages from family members I hadn't spoken to in years, some of them offering apologies, others demanding explanations. It was a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion, but in the end, I stood firm. My parents, especially my mom, finally acknowledged what had been happening. She sent me a text, "Mom, 3:47 p.m. I'm so sorry, honey." I didn't know. I wish I'd seen it sooner. I didn't know what to say at first. I had always hoped for her to see me, not just as a convenient person to rely on, but as her daughter. She promised to have a conversation with Nolan and Celeste, but I knew that, deep down, it wasn't going to be easy. There were years of dynamics at play that couldn't just be fixed with a simple apology. It's been a few months since the wedding, and the dust has mostly settled, but not without some lasting changes. Nolan and Celeste have gone completely silent. They never apologized publicly, nor did they reach out to me again after that final phone call. From what I've heard through the grapevine, they're still trying to downplay what happened. They claim it was a misunderstanding and that I overreacted. But most people in the family have seen the receipts, the messages, and the timeline. They know the truth now. The story they tried to spin didn't hold up under scrutiny. My mom, surprisingly, has made an effort to change. She and I are on better terms than we've been in years, not perfect, but improved. She apologized, not just in a quick message, but in a real conversation. She admitted that she let Nolan's behavior slide for too long and that she didn't always see how I was treated. She's been trying to include me more, not just when something needs to be done, but genuinely. I'm cautiously hopeful, but still keeping my boundaries. Micah, my friend who helped me with the event and gave the decorations a second life, has been a rock through all of this. He even helped me create a small side business with the leftover floral and event work I'd been doing unofficially for years. Now, I'm running my own event planning service part-time. It's nothing massive yet, but it feels good to turn something painful into something empowering. As for the rest of the family, it's divided. Some have reached out in support. They told me they'd seen similar things in the past, but never knew how deep it ran. Others are still trying to stay neutral, but I've decided not to chase people's approval anymore. If they didn't stand up when it mattered, I'm not bending over backward to earn their grace now. I'm still healing from it all. That night changed how I see my family, and more importantly, how I see myself. For years, I let myself be useful so I could feel included. But now, I've realized being needed isn't the same as being loved. I'm Billy, 27 now, but this story starts back when I had just turned 24, the birthday that changed everything. Growing up, my family wasn't the kind that celebrated milestones unless it benefited someone else. My mom had a way of twisting every occasion into a performance about her sacrifices. My dad went along with it, quiet but complicit, like a man who gave up trying to have his own opinions decades ago. Then there was my younger sister, Natalie, the self-appointed princess of the family who never had to ask twice for anything. Somehow, no matter what happened, I was always the one expected to understand, to help, to not make things about me. I used to think that was normal. I used to think being the good son meant being quiet about what I needed. But on my 24th birthday, I finally realized how deep that imbalance ran. That morning, I woke up to an empty kitchen table. No note, no card, not even a text. My family had always been hit or miss when it came to birthdays, but after a long, stressful week at work and months of saving for a small promotion celebration, I figured maybe this year would be different. I wasn't asking for much, just a nice dinner together. So around noon, I called my mom. "Hey, Mom," I said, trying to sound casual. "I was thinking maybe we could do dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just something small. It's been a while since we all sat down together." She paused for a few seconds, long enough for me to picture her frowning into the phone. "Dinner? Tonight?" "Yeah," I said. "It's my birthday. I thought it'd be nice." "Oh, right," she replied flatly. I completely forgot. Then came the sigh, the one she used whenever she wanted me to feel like I was inconveniencing her. "Billy, you know Natalie has her big presentation tomorrow, and I've been helping her prepare. She's been under a lot of stress. We can't just drop everything for a dinner." It was like she hadn't even heard what I said. I tried to keep my voice calm, but it came out softer than I intended. "It's just one night, Mom. We could do takeout at home if that's easier." "Stop making everything about you," she snapped. "You're old enough to handle a birthday without turning it into a production. Be grateful your sister's trying to make something of herself instead of demanding attention all the time." That sentence hit harder than she probably realized. I'd been working full-time since I was 19, 2 jobs through college, paying off student loans without a cent of help. Meanwhile, Natalie, 2 years younger than me, had never worked a day in her life. Yet somehow she was always trying, always under pressure, always the one worth adjusting the schedule for. "Mom," I said slowly, "it's not about taking attention. I just thought." She cut me off. "We'll see. But don't be dramatic, Billy. If we can't, we can't. You can celebrate another time." That was the moment something in me started to shift. I hung up, sat at my kitchen table, and stared at the half-made sandwich in front of me. I told myself I shouldn't be surprised. This was just how my family operated. But deep down, it hurt more than I wanted to admit. All I wanted was one dinner, one small acknowledgement that I mattered too. Around 6 that evening, I decided to go over anyway. I picked up a cake from the bakery, a small chocolate one with "Happy Birthday, Billy" written on top. It felt childish, like I was forcing a celebration that no one wanted to attend, but I couldn't help myself. I just needed to believe my family could do better. When I arrived, The house looked the same as always, immaculate but cold. The kind of clean that doesn't feel like home. My dad was in the living room watching TV, and Natalie was sitting on the couch surrounded by papers. No one even looked up when I walked in. "Hey," I said, trying to sound upbeat. "Thought we could do dinner together." My dad glanced over, expression unreadable. "Your mom's still out with Natalie's team. She said she'd grab food on the way back." "Oh," I said, trying not to sound disappointed. "Well, I brought a cake. We can still eat when she gets home." Natalie didn't even lift her eyes. "You really picked the worst day, Billy. I have to finalize my slides tonight." I wanted to laugh. It was always the worst day whenever it wasn't about her. But before I could respond, my mom came through the door carrying a takeout bag and talking loudly into her phone. She ended the call, glanced at me, and frowned. "Billy, what are you doing here?" I held up the cake. "I thought we could all have dinner together." She set the bag down, sighing. "Billy, I told you it's not a good time. You can't just show up expecting everyone to drop what they're doing." "I just wanted to celebrate with my family," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Stop," she said sharply. "You're too sensitive. It's one day. Not everything revolves around you." The words felt like ice water. My dad shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to stay out of it, and Natalie smirked like I was being ridiculous. That small, knowing smile, that's what broke me. I looked at the cake in my hands, then at my mom. "You know what? You're right," I said quietly. "Not everything revolves around me." I set the cake on the counter, grabbed my jacket, and walked toward the door. "Billy, don't be childish," she called after me. "You're overreacting again." I stopped in the doorway, turned around, and met her eyes. "I'm not overreacting. I just finally get it." Then I left. That night, sitting alone in my car with the uneaten cake beside me, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't keep chasing scraps of acknowledgement from people who never wanted to give it. If they couldn't see my worth now, they'd see it one day, just not in the way they expected. Over the next year, I poured everything into my work. I took every extra project, every late-night shift. Slowly, things began to change. I started freelancing on the side, and by the time I turned 25, I'd built a small business from the ground up. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. I didn't tell my family about it. They'd only find a way to diminish it, to tell me it was just a hobby. They still called occasionally, usually when Natalie needed something or when Mom wanted to guilt me about not coming around more. I kept my distance. But as my business grew, so did a quiet, simmering sense of satisfaction. I wasn't rich, not yet, but for the first time, I was free. Then, about a year and a half later, something unexpected happened, something that pulled me right back into their orbit. It started with a phone call. "Billy," my mom said, her voice unusually sweet. "We've been meaning to talk. How about you come over for dinner this weekend? We miss you." It sounded innocent enough. But with my family, kindness always came with strings attached. And this time, those strings would unravel everything. When my mom called that day, her tone caught me completely off guard. She sounded cheerful, almost warm, and it had been months since we'd spoken beyond a few stiff texts about family updates. I didn't trust it for a second, but curiosity got the better of me. A part of me, the one that still wanted to believe they could change, thought maybe this was progress. Maybe she realized how much she'd hurt me that night. So I agreed. That Saturday, I drove over to my parents' house, though our family home didn't feel much like mine anymore. The place looked exactly the same, neat, overly polished, with not a single thing out of place. Even the smell was familiar, lemon cleaner, and the faint scent of my mom's perfume. It was strange how something could feel so familiar and foreign at the same time. When I walked in, Natalie was sitting at the table with my mom, surrounded by printouts and coffee cups. They both looked up at me, smiling in that forced, polite way people do when they've just been talking about you. My dad was in the living room again, half watching the news, pretending not to notice me. "Billy," my mom said, standing up like I was some long-lost friend. "Look at you. You've lost weight. Are you eating properly?" I smiled faintly. "I'm fine, Mom. Just been busy." "Busy, huh?" Natalie said without looking up from her notes. "Doing what?" "Still working that, what was it again? Computer stuff?" Her tone had that fake innocence she always used when she wanted to sound curious but really meant to belittle you. I just nodded. "Yeah, business has been going well, actually." "That's good," Mom said quickly before Natalie could reply. "We're proud of you, honey." She gave me that bright, too wide smile. It didn't reach her eyes. Anyway, dinner's almost ready. We're having roast chicken, Natalie's favorite. Of course. I didn't even bother pointing it out. Dinner was tense, but civil at first. My mom asked surface-level questions about work, none of which she seemed to care about. Every time I mentioned something I'd accomplished, Natalie would find a way to twist it. When I told them I'd landed a few big clients, she leaned back and said, "That's nice, but don't you get nervous depending on freelance work? I'd hate to be constantly worrying about where the next paycheck comes from." I just smiled tightly. "It's actually pretty steady now." Mom nodded approvingly at Natalie instead of me. "See, that's what I've always said. It's better to have something stable, like your sister's career path. She's planning ahead." I almost laughed out loud. Natalie had been planning ahead since she graduated, but as far as I knew, she still didn't have a real job, just a few internships my parents had pulled strings for. The rest of dinner followed the same pattern, me talking, them dismissing. But what really made my stomach tighten was when Mom brought up my absence from family gatherings. "You know, Billy, your father and I have been worried," she began, cutting her chicken delicately. "You've been so distant lately. It's not healthy to isolate yourself from family." I put my fork down. "Mom, I've tried. It just didn't feel like anyone wanted me around." "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said immediately. "We all love you. You just have a habit of making things bigger than they are." I leaned back, forcing myself to stay calm. "Like when I asked for a birthday dinner, and you told me to stop making everything about me?" The table went silent. Natalie's fork paused midair. My mom didn't even blink. "You're still holding on to that?" she said, her voice flat. "Billy, it's been years. We all have bad days." "Sure," I said quietly. "But your bad day became my memory of turning 24. Her eyes narrowed slightly, the way they always did when she realized she couldn't control the tone of the conversation anymore. "You're too sensitive," she muttered, shaking her head. "You always were." I felt the heat rise in my chest. "And you always dismissed it when I tried to talk about it." Natalie sighed dramatically. "Can we not do this right now? I have a big week ahead, and the last thing I need is a family argument." Mom immediately turned to her. "You're right, honey. Billy, let's not ruin dinner." I wanted to laugh at the irony, but I didn't. I just nodded, quietly eating the rest of my food. After dinner, Mom insisted I stay for dessert, though the dessert turned out to be leftover store-bought brownies. While she made coffee, she suddenly shifted the tone, her voice light and sugary again. "Billy, you've always been good with money, haven't you?" There it was, the real reason for the invitation. I smiled faintly. "I manage." "Well," she said, glancing at Natalie, "your sister's got an incredible opportunity coming up. A new project with her company. But she needs a little financial help to get started." Natalie gave me a hopeful smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's just a short-term loan, Billy. You know I'd pay you back." I almost choked on my coffee. "You're asking me for money?" "Not asking," Mom corrected. "We're just hoping you could support your sister like family does. We helped you so much when you were starting out." I blinked. "You mean when you told me not to waste my time on my silly projects?" Her lips pressed together. "Billy, don't twist things. We gave you a home, food, and support. Isn't that what family's for?" I stared at her. The nerve of it all, the revisionist history, the manipulation, made my hands shake. They had never supported my ambitions. If anything, they made them harder. Every time I tried to talk about what I was building, they'd laugh or change the subject to Natalie's latest achievement. "I'm sorry," I said slowly, setting the cup down. "But I can't do that." Natalie's face fell instantly, her voice softening into that pitiful, practiced tone she always used. "Billy, it's just a few thousand. You probably make more than me anyway. It wouldn't even be a big deal." I shook my head. "It's not about the money. It's about how you treat me. Every time I say no, it turns into me being selfish. But when you say no, everyone rushes to understand your side." My mom's smile vanished completely. "You're being ungrateful." "For what?" I asked. "For everything we've done for you," she snapped. "Do you think you'd be where you are if it weren't for our support?" I stood up, pushing my chair back slowly. "You're right. I wouldn't be. I'd be further ahead." For a moment, no one spoke. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with the kind of tension that had been building for years. My dad finally looked up from the couch, his voice tentative. "Let's all calm down." But Mom wasn't done. "You've changed, Billy. You used to be considerate. Now you're cold. You think money makes you better than your family." I exhaled slowly. No, Mom. I just think it lets me finally say no without you holding it over my head. Her jaw tightened, and Natalie crossed her arms. Wow, she said. All this because we forgot your birthday once. That's exactly the problem, I said, walking toward the door. You think it was about a birthday. It was about never maturing enough to be considered. Mom followed me to the entryway, her tone shifting again, soft, almost pleading. Don't go like this. We're family, Billy. Don't throw that away. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she wasn't pleading because she cared. She was pleading because she didn't want to lose control. I'm not throwing anything away, I said. I'm just done trying to hold it together by myself. And I left again. For weeks afterward, I didn't hear from them. Not a word. I thought maybe that was the end of it. I focused on my business, which had grown faster than I'd ever expected. I started hiring people, expanding, building something real. But then, a few months later, it happened again. A call, this time from my dad. Billy, he said awkwardly, your mom's been a little stressed. She feels bad about how things went. Maybe you could stop by this Sunday. No arguments, just family dinner. I almost said no. I should have. But curiosity, and maybe a shred of hope, won again. When I arrived that Sunday, everything felt off. The table was set more elaborately than usual, and both my parents were overly cheerful. Natalie wasn't there. For a moment, I actually thought this might be a genuine attempt at reconciliation. Until dessert. That's when Mom casually mentioned, your sister's moving into that new apartment we told you about. We're helping with the deposit, but it's been tight lately. If you could lend a hand, just this once, it would mean so much. There it was again, the pattern repeating like clockwork. But this time, I didn't argue. I just smiled and nodded, letting her believe I might help. I listened, I agreed, and I left quietly. Because I realized something that night. Arguing with them never changed anything. They didn't hear me when I spoke, only when I acted. It took a while, but eventually, I started to realize something crucial about my family. Their pleasantries were always transactional. Every smile, every invitation, every moment of apparent warmth came with a hidden price tag. And that realization hit hardest on a day I should have felt safe. The day I found out Natalie had betrayed me in a way I couldn't have imagined. It all started with a routine Monday morning at work. I was sitting in my small home office, scrolling through emails, sipping coffee, trying to ignore the faint ache of loneliness that had followed me since that birthday years ago. My business was growing steadily, clients were reliable, a few new projects were lined up, but I'd learned the hard way to be cautious with success. You can't let people see how well you're doing unless you're prepared for the envy that comes with it. And unfortunately, family envy is the worst kind, because they already know you inside and out. That morning, a message popped up on my client portal that immediately set off alarm bells. One of my larger clients, a company I'd been nurturing for over 6 months, had suddenly requested to terminate our contract. Their reason? Unforeseen internal issues. That's the professional explanation, at least. But something about it smelled off. I called my contact, trying to remain calm. Is everything okay? I asked politely. We had everything scheduled for next week. Oh, yes, everything's fine on our end, the client replied. It's just a corporate policy thing. We had to switch providers for this quarter. Nothing personal. I thanked them, but I couldn't shake the sinking feeling in my chest. I knew how businesses work, and this explanation didn't fit the timeline. We had already started preparing for the next project. Someone had undermined me. Someone had deliberately sabotaged my work. And the truth hit me like a punch. I remembered a conversation Natalie had slipped into months ago. She was casually asking about my clients, asking questions that seemed innocent at the time. I'd brushed it off, thinking she was curious, maybe even trying to show interest in my life. But suddenly, I saw it clearly. She'd been gathering information, my schedule, my client list, my contacts, and using it against me. I didn't confront her immediately. I needed proof. I started digging, tracing emails, checking logs. Within a few days, it became undeniable. Natalie had reached out to one of my clients directly, under the guise of offering industry advice, and had convinced them to terminate our agreement. The audacity of it made my stomach churn. This wasn't just jealousy. This was calculated, deliberate sabotage by the person who was supposed to be family. When I finally confronted her, I did it calmly, in front of my mom. I wanted them both to see exactly who she was and what they had allowed. Natalie, I said, holding up the forwarded emails as evidence, What is this? She looked up from her phone, feigning innocence. What are you talking about? I slid the emails across the table. You contacted my client. You undermined me. You made them terminate our contract. Do you even understand what that means? Mom's face paled. Billy, don't be ridiculous. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. There's nothing reasonable about this. I snapped, my voice shaking. You sabotaged me. You lied to me. You manipulated my clients behind my back. Natalie finally looked up, and in that moment, I saw the same arrogance and entitlement that had haunted me since childhood. She smirked. Oh, come on. It's just business. You've been doing so well. It's not like you can't handle a little competition. I felt something in my chest tighten, like a balloon being squeezed. Competition? This is my livelihood. This is what I built from nothing. Mom finally spoke, her tone defensive, almost panicked. Billy, you're overreacting. You know how your sister is. She didn't mean it like that. It was just a mistake. I laughed bitterly. A mistake? She deliberately went behind my back and destroyed months of work. That's not a mistake, Mom. That's betrayal. Natalie shrugged. You always take things too seriously. Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with work, you'd understand family comes first. At that moment, the last thread of trust snapped. Everything I had believed about them, about family being a safe place, was a lie. They were more concerned about protecting Natalie, preserving her ego, than acknowledging the damage she'd done. My mom's attempts to minimize it, to brush it off as an accident, made it worse. I realized then that I could never rely on them to act fairly, to act with integrity, or even to act like family. I left that day in silence, walking out without another word. The betrayal didn't just hurt, it enraged me. Not the kind of rage that made you yell or cry, but the cold, simmering kind that fuels strategy. I spent the next few weeks quietly picking up the pieces. I resecured the clients I could, repaired relationships, and implemented safeguards to ensure nothing like this could happen again. But the damage to my trust had been done, and that was something I couldn't fix. For the first time in my life, I started thinking strategically, not just about my work, but about my family. I realized that if I ever let them back in without consequences, they'd never stop. They'd continue to manipulate, belittle, and sabotage me whenever it suited them. And Natalie, she had proven she was willing to cross every line, break every boundary, and destroy anything I worked for without a second thought. I started documenting everything: emails, texts, financial transactions. I kept meticulous records. Every slight, every manipulation, every outright betrayal was logged. I didn't want to react impulsively. I wanted to understand the full picture first. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, there would be no room for denial, no room for excuses. But that wasn't all. I also started investing quietly, putting my earnings into assets that my family had no idea about. Real estate, stocks, small ventures that would compound over time. I wanted to be untouchable. I wanted to build something so undeniable that my family, no matter how entitled or manipulative, couldn't twist the narrative against me. Meanwhile, they continued to show up in my life, trying to pretend nothing had happened. Mom would call, apologizing vaguely. Billy, I'm sorry about the stress. We just want the best for you. Natalie would text, sending the occasional emoji-laden message like nothing had occurred. Hey, hope work's going well. I didn't respond. I knew better. Their apologies were never sincere. They were testing the waters, seeing if I would forgive, if I would let my guard down. But I wasn't that naive anymore. Then, the final blow came, an act so calculated it made my stomach drop and my hands shake. Mom had managed to convince a small mutual acquaintance, someone I had trusted to advise me on an upcoming expansion, to feed them information about my business strategies. It was subtle, innocuous questions about market trends, casual mentions of my growth plans, but it was enough. Enough for them to start planting seeds of doubt in Natalie's mind. Enough for them to turn her envy into action. The day I discovered it, I felt the full weight of everything. Months of work, late nights, careful planning, and quiet victories had all been shadowed by their interference. They had once again inserted themselves into my life, attempting to manipulate outcomes to suit their own sense of entitlement. The betrayal wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. They wanted control, and they wanted to remind me that no matter how independent I thought I was, they still had the power to disrupt me. I sat in my office that night, staring at the documents and messages I had compiled. A single thought echoed in my mind. If they wanted to play dirty, so could I. But this time, I wouldn't react out of emotion. I wouldn't argue or plead or try to reason. I would plan. And when the time came, every slight, every manipulation, every betrayal would have a consequence they couldn't ignore. The thing about betrayal is that it changes you. It sharpens you. It makes you notice patterns you never saw before. And now, after Natalie's deliberate attack, after my mom's complicity, and after years of being dismissed, I finally understood something fundamental. Family doesn't automatically protect you. Sometimes, it's the enemy you know best. And enemies are best defeated when they least expect it. After Natalie's sabotage, I thought I had reached my breaking point. For the first time in years, I felt completely and utterly alone. It wasn't just the loss of a client or the financial setback. It was the realization that the people I had called family, the people I had trusted implicitly, were willing to undermine me at the slightest opportunity. And the worst part was the silence that followed. There were no apologies, no attempts to make amends, just the usual pretending everything was normal, as if I'd never existed that day. I went through that week in a haze. I didn't want to answer the phone, didn't want to see emails from anyone, didn't even want to leave my apartment except to get groceries or coffee. My business was surviving, barely, but I felt hollow, like the foundation of my life had been pulled out from under me. My sleep was erratic. I'd wake up in the middle of the night replaying every conversation, every slight, every betrayal, thinking, how did I get here? How did I let this happen? It was a hard, dark period. I spent hours walking around the city at night, alone, replaying memories that had long been tucked away. I remembered my birthdays ignored, my achievements minimized, my opinions dismissed. I remembered Natalie being praised for mediocrity, Mom and Dad turning a blind eye to injustice, and me standing there, waiting for recognition that never came. And then, in one of those quiet, lonely nights, I realized something. I could either keep drowning in this bitterness, letting them control my emotions and define my worth, or I could use it. I could take that energy, that hurt, and turn it into something powerful. I couldn't control them, but I could control myself. I couldn't stop their envy or entitlement, but I could make sure it never harmed me again. So I started small. I doubled down on my work, not just to make money, but to regain confidence. I refused to engage with my family anymore unless it was necessary, and even then, I kept interactions strictly surface level. I focused on my clients, expanded my services, and slowly began to see results. I found a rhythm, a quiet satisfaction in building something that belonged solely to me, without interference from anyone else. At first, the progress was incremental. I landed a few new clients here and there, took on projects that stretched my abilities, and learned how to manage my time more effectively. I invested late nights in research, learning the nuances of business I'd only brushed over before. I started keeping meticulous records, tracking not just finances, but growth trends and client satisfaction. Each small success felt like a victory, a reminder that I was capable, even without their validation. As months passed, my business began to flourish. I hired a small team, people I trusted and respected, who understood my vision. I set up systems to prevent any manipulation from outsiders, knowing now how vulnerable I could be when I allowed others into my professional life. I was learning to build walls, literal and metaphorical, around my success. Meanwhile, my family continued their usual behaviors, oblivious to the fact that I had grown untouchable. My mom called occasionally, always under the guise of checking in, but I refused to engage beyond polite, brief responses. Natalie sent texts pretending to care about my business, asking innocuous questions, but I had long since stopped sharing anything meaningful. Every interaction was a reminder of the manipulation and betrayal, and I refused to give them that power again. The more I focused on myself, the more I realized how little I had depended on anyone. For years, I had let their opinions dictate my decisions, let their envy and favoritism shape my self-worth. Now I was free to make choices based on my own priorities, my own ambitions, my own values. I started investing in assets outside of the business, stocks, small real estate ventures, and other opportunities that would grow quietly without drawing attention. I built a financial cushion that made me feel secure, a safety net they could never touch. And as I grew stronger, I began to notice something interesting. Their behavior toward me started to shift, subtly at first. Mom's calls became more frequent, her tone gentler, though still calculating. Natalie started mentioning my projects in passing, casually asking questions that hinted at curiosity more than genuine concern. My dad, always the quiet one, started dropping subtle comments about my success when we crossed paths. I didn't respond. I didn't reward their attention. I let them exist on the periphery of my life while I continued to grow. I started setting boundaries that they couldn't push past, and every time they tried, I reinforced them calmly but firmly. It wasn't about revenge yet. It was about proving to myself that I could stand independent of them, that I could thrive despite their toxicity. By the time my next birthday rolled around, things were drastically different. I didn't need their recognition or approval anymore. I celebrated quietly, with close friends and colleagues who genuinely cared about me, in a way that felt fulfilling. There were no dramas, no manipulations, no passive-aggressive remarks. I felt the first true sense of pride I had ever experienced, the knowledge that I had built something real on my own terms. And yet, beneath the calm and the success, a part of me remained alert. The betrayal had taught me a valuable lesson. You can't underestimate people who feel entitled. I kept my eyes open, my records meticulous, and my plans deliberate. I knew that eventually, there would be a moment when my family's envy would meet my power. When that moment came, I wanted to be ready, not reacting from emotion, but acting with strategy, precision, and the quiet satisfaction that only comes from being in control. For now, though, I continued the slow climb. I expanded my business into areas my family didn't know about, diversified my income, and reinforced my independence. Every day was a building block, every success a reminder that I no longer needed them to validate me. And the more I built, the more I realized the most powerful thing of all, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. Even when I saw them occasionally, Mom calling, Natalie sending messages, Dad making small comments, their words no longer had the power to wound me. I had transformed my anger and hurt into focus and growth. I had learned to trust myself, to rely only on those who had earned it, and to recognize that family, in the absence of respect, could never be more than an obstacle. The stage was set. I was stronger, wiser, and infinitely more patient than I had ever been. And now that I had reached this point, I knew what came next. I would make them see, not through arguments, not through pleas, but through undeniable proof. The proof of everything they had underestimated, every slight they had committed, every betrayal they had inflicted. And when that time came, they wouldn't be able to dismiss it, twist it, or pretend it didn't happen. They would finally understand the full measure of what they had lost. Over the next year, I quietly expanded my network, always careful not to tip my hand. I knew my family was watching, even if they didn't realize how closely. Mom's calls became more frequent. Natalie tried to casually inquire about my projects, and even my dad began mentioning me to friends, always underestimating what I was capable of. None of it mattered to me anymore. I had learned the art of patience. Revenge wasn't about snapping in the moment. It was about building leverage, quietly gaining power while they continued under the illusion that nothing had changed. It started with small opportunities, industry meetups, informal client gatherings, workshops I attended on weekends. At first, I went for the knowledge, learning things about the market I hadn't considered, emerging trends, gaps my competitors hadn't noticed, and ways to automate processes that would save me months of work. But the more I learned, the more I realized I could leverage this information to grow beyond my current level, to create a position where I would be untouchable. One evening, at a conference on digital business strategies, I struck up a conversation with a senior executive from a mid-sized company in my industry. He was impressed with my ideas and the way I had built my company from scratch. Over the course of the next few weeks, we exchanged emails, discussed strategies, and eventually met for a private consultation. That meeting was pivotal, not just because it brought me a major client, but because it taught me something I had underestimated: the power of alliances. People who respect your skills, who recognize your value, can become allies in ways your family never will. They can amplify your success instead of undermining it. I realized then that my family had always been my biggest obstacle, not just because of their interference, but because I had been operating on their terms. I had measured my worth according to their approval, which they had never given. To gain power, I had to step out of that system entirely. I needed to create influence that existed outside their perception, beyond their reach. I began investing in strategies that could put me in control of narratives. I diversified my business into complementary ventures, a small digital marketing agency, a boutique consulting firm, and a niche software tool I had been developing quietly for months. Each piece worked in concert, allowing me to expand my influence, increase my revenue, and create a network that relied solely on me. By the end of that year, I had contracts with multiple major clients, some of whom were household names in my field, and my business was beginning to scale at a rate I had never imagined possible. And then I discovered the tool that would give me a kind of leverage I hadn't anticipated. One of my new clients introduced me to a platform that tracked market influence, brand visibility, and potential acquisition opportunities. Using this platform, I could analyze competitors, identify weaknesses, and predict strategic moves. Essentially, it was a way to map out power dynamics in my industry, knowledge that could be used not just for business success, but for strategic advantage in any negotiation. I started testing it on small cases first, analyzing rival agencies, predicting client needs, and using the insights to offer better deals. Each success reinforced my confidence. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was learning to operate at a higher level, thinking several steps ahead. I realized that if I applied the same strategy to my family, I could turn the very tools they had used to belittle me into instruments of control. It was around this time that a more personal opportunity presented itself. I had a distant cousin, Marissa, who ran a small family-owned business. She was struggling to keep it afloat, and when I offered some guidance, she readily accepted. Over a series of months, I helped her restructure operations, improve marketing, and stabilize finances. In return, she shared insights into my family's finances, habits, and vulnerabilities. Through her, I discovered that Mom and Dad were relying heavily on inherited assets, using them to prop up Natalie's ventures while minimizing any investment in mine. I also learned that Natalie had been overextending herself in a few speculative projects, unaware of the full financial consequences, something I could exploit strategically later if needed. Armed with this knowledge, I realized something crucial. I didn't just have the power to protect myself anymore. I had the ability to influence outcomes in ways my family couldn't predict. I could quietly shift their world without them ever realizing I was orchestrating it. I could turn the envy, the entitlement, the manipulations they had wielded against me back on them, but in a way that would be undeniable, inescapable, and entirely under my control. At the same time, I began to build credibility in public spaces. I started giving talks at conferences, writing articles for industry publications, and sharing insights on digital platforms. My reputation grew not because I needed validation from my family, but because people recognized value in my work. I became someone with influence, someone who could command attention, not through theatrics, but through expertise. And through all of this, my family remained oblivious. They still attempted to insert themselves into my life in subtle ways. Mom would call under the guise of casual conversation, Natalie would make veiled comments about my success, and my dad would occasionally drop hints about keeping the family close. But I treated them as I treated any minor business competitor, observing, cataloging, and learning patterns without revealing my own hand. The turning point came when I realized the potential of what I had built. I wasn't just creating wealth. I was creating leverage, influence, and control. With the information I had gathered, the alliances I had formed, and the strategic position I had cultivated, I could orchestrate moves that would force my family to confront the reality of their actions. Not through confrontation, not through anger, but through undeniable evidence, influence, and the quiet application of power. By this point, I had reached a level of stability and influence that would have been unimaginable a few years earlier. My business was thriving, my reputation was solid, and my strategic position allowed me to think several steps ahead of anyone who might try to interfere, including my family. Every past slight, every betrayal, every manipulation became data points in a grander picture. I was no longer reactive. I was calculating. And the final realization hit me quietly one night, as I reviewed my growing portfolio and client base. I didn't just have the means to protect myself anymore. I had the tools, the information, and the strategic insight to turn every injustice, every slight, and every betrayal into leverage. My family had underestimated me for years. They thought I was too sensitive, too soft, too forgiving. They were wrong. The setup for what was to come wasn't just about revenge. It was about inevitability. I had built a position where I could move with precision, influence outcomes, and control the narrative entirely. And they would never see it coming. It was only a matter of time before the first piece fell into place. This is the part I'd rehearsed in my head 1,000 times without ever letting it go loud. Because a good plan doesn't need theatrics. It needs precision, timing, and the right audience. For months, I'd been cataloging everything. Emails, timestamps, bank trails, casual messages where my family tried to rewrite reality. I'd built allies, people who respected my work, and, more importantly, people who had power in places my family didn't even know existed. I didn't want to humiliate them in an angry, public spectacle. I wanted consequences that would fit the crimes: loss of credibility, loss of leverage, and the quiet collapse of the safety nets they'd relied on to keep their entitled life going. I started by lining up 3 things I knew would matter to them: credibility, cash, and reputation. For Natalie, credibility was everything. Her career advancement depended on a string of endorsements and a fragile investor who adored her vision. For Mom, reputation was the currency she circulated at school fundraisers and neighborhood gatherings. For both of them, a hint that they couldn't be trusted would force them to scramble. And scramble is the moment when people make mistakes. I invited them to what they thought was a belated birthday dinner. Again, and this time they took the bait eagerly. Mom was all warmth and "we can finally be a family" lines, like she'd rehearsed a role. Natalie arrived with her usual practice brightness and a new portfolio she couldn't wait to show me. They were smug in the way only people who've never had to fight for respect can be. What they didn't know was that dinner wasn't the event. The event happened the next day, privately, with 4 people they never expected to be in the same room. I'd spent months building relationships with industry people who respected my work and with a couple of key figures who could make or break small ventures. Marissa, the cousin I'd quietly helped, an executive from the firm that had been my big client, and a small-time investor who'd been considering backing Natalie's next big thing. I asked them to meet for coffee on the pretense of discussing industry trends. I gave them a curated packet, anonymized at first, about how certain family dynamics can poison small businesses and ruin reputations, and then I let the facts speak. The packet was surgical. It included the emails where Natalie reached out to my clients, screenshots of the messages where Mom tried to gaslight me into forgiving and forgetting, transaction records showing how family funds had shuffled under the guise of support, and a timeline that tied actions to consequences. Nothing personal, no grandstanding, no screaming. Just evidence, laid out like a brief. I made sure every item had a corroborating contact. Marissa could attest to the financial shuffles. The executive could confirm that Natalie had been in contact with their procurement team, and the investor could show how he'd pulled preliminary interest after seeing the pattern of instability. When I first sent the packet, they read it silently. Then, one by one, they nodded. The atmosphere was clinical, the kind you find in rooms where contracts are decided. The investor called his associate. The executive made a note and said he'd adjust their vendor list. Marissa said she'd go back to her family with a financial reality check. That was all I needed. These were dominoes that toppled quietly and efficiently. I didn't revel in the moment. I walked into the meeting like someone who'd come to work, because that's what it was, work to correct a long injustice. But the effects were immediate. Within days, Natalie's potential investor withdrew his interest with a formal email citing concerns about governance and transparency. The executive publicly changed a vendor relationship that indirectly affected a separate opportunity Natalie had been courting. Marissa confronted Mom with the spreadsheets she'd shared, and Mom's practiced responses faltered when an outside voice started asking direct questions she couldn't smooth over with charm. The real payoff, though, was subtler and sweeter. Instead of screaming and pointing, I let other people's decisions do the talking. Reputation, once gone, doesn't come back with apologies. The kind of people who host gala tables and endorse neighbors don't like uncertainty. Once a whisper of doubt started circulating among people who mattered to them, the invitations thinned, the whispered endorsements vanished, and the pedestal they'd stood on for years began to wobble. When I finally saw them together, Mom pale and defensive, Natalie flustered, and suddenly human in a way I'd never seen. something unexpected happened inside me. There was relief, yes, but it wasn't the vicious satisfaction I'd once imagined. It was the quiet closure of a ledger finally balanced. I hadn't sought to destroy them. I wanted them to feel the same uncomfortable accountability they'd so often flung at me. I wanted the scales to tip long enough for them to understand what it felt like to be on the receiving end. That said, I didn't stop there. I took steps to protect myself further. I formalized agreements, tightened contracts, installed redundancies, and made sure the next time someone tried to sabotage me, there would be legal and professional consequences that couldn't be explained away with family disagreements. I also made one more move that felt, at the time, surgical and inevitable. I quietly acquired a small stake in a property their side business relied on, not to ruin them, but to ensure they couldn't leverage the same shaky foundations against me again. The fallout was immediate and messy for them. My inbox filled with messages from people I barely knew, thanking me for bringing issues to light. My public reputation, built slowly and honestly, grew stronger because I'd shown competence and restraint. My private life felt lighter because the people who'd once weaponized my kindness now had to reckon with consequences in spaces where their charm didn't work. But here's the part one won't tidy up for you yet. As the first wave of consequences hit, they didn't just fold gracefully. Entitlement doesn't disappear quietly. It lashes out. Mom called twice, once with a plea that sounded like grief, the next time with thinly veiled accusations. Natalie made a public attempt to paint herself as a victim of gossip. And in the middle of that scramble, a new, unexpected variable appeared. One that I hadn't planned for, and that pulled me back into something I thought I'd already closed. I sat there, watching the dominoes fall, feeling that old mix of vindication and unease. I had executed the plan cleanly and professionally. It worked. But the new variable, someone else's reaction, someone neither of us had anticipated, was already starting to ripple, and it promised to change the game in a way I hadn't accounted for. The weeks following my quiet execution of the plan were surreal. I watched the fallout unfold like a storm I had orchestrated but didn't need to micromanage. Natalie's investor didn't just withdraw. He publicly announced a shift in priorities, citing due diligence concerns, and the news spread in the niche industry circles they relied on. Any potential project Natalie had lined up began to evaporate quietly. The partner she had bragged about for months no longer returned her calls. For someone who had built their ego entirely on external validation, it was devastating. Mom's reaction was slower, but no less telling. She tried her usual tactics: calls, texts, half-hearted apologies, hints about family bonds. But this time, every attempt bounced back against her. Marissa had compiled the records I'd shared into a clear, irrefutable summary, showing how funds were being mismanaged and how past manipulations had consistently harmed me while propping up Natalie. Neighbors and friends, previously swayed by Mom's charm, began asking pointed questions. Invitations that once flowed effortlessly now became scarce. Mom, for the first time, experienced the quiet social isolation she had inflicted on me emotionally for years. Even Dad couldn't maneuver his way out. A few of his business contacts, quietly informed of patterns of interference and favoritism, began to reconsider partnerships. Where he had once been able to lean on authority and history, now every move was scrutinized, and he realized too late that the credibility he had assumed as a birthright was gone. Meanwhile, I continued my life in stark contrast, growing my business, expanding my network, and nurturing partnerships that were built on competence and integrity rather than entitlement. Each meeting, each contract, each client interaction reminded me that I no longer needed approval from the people who had so often dismissed me. I could measure success on my own terms. The most satisfying moments, though, were subtle, the ones that no one else saw but me. The look on Natalie's face when she realized her credibility was collapsing, the slight falter in Mom's voice when she couldn't charm her way out of questions, the way Dad paused mid-sentence when someone outside the family referenced the truth about their past decisions. These were small, quiet victories, but they cut deeper than any dramatic confrontation ever could. I didn't gloat. I didn't call them out publicly. I let the systems I had built and the people I had quietly informed do the work. It was a lesson in power. The most effective revenge is the one that doesn't require your presence to succeed. I had orchestrated outcomes that were both inevitable and irrevocable. The trust they had shattered in me was returned in the form of accountability, and for the first time, they experienced a fraction of the disempowerment they had inflicted. Months later, I looked back at everything, the manipulations, the betrayals, the long years of being dismissed, and I felt a sense of closure that was profound. Not because I had destroyed anyone, but because I had reclaimed my own narrative. I had taken what was once a source of pain and turned it into a foundation for strength. I had proven to myself that no one, not family, not envy, not entitlement, could dictate my worth. The final, quiet affirmation came one morning when I received a text from an acquaintance in the industry. Your reputation is solid. You've handled everything flawlessly. I smiled at my phone, knowing it wasn't just about reputation. It was about freedom. I had risen above the chaos they created, and their own actions had done more to diminish them than any argument ever could. As I closed my laptop that morning, sipping my coffee in the quiet of my home, I realized something that I hadn't allowed myself to believe for a long time. I was finally untouchable, not because I was perfect, but because I had learned to build power from patience, intelligence, and resilience. And in that calm, powerful moment, I finally felt what I had been chasing all these years. Not revenge, not recognition, but peace, and the unshakable knowledge that I had emerged victorious on my own terms. The ledger was balanced, the lessons were learned, and for the first time, I was truly free. At my dad's retirement party, I worked all day setting up and running errands. When I asked about giving a speech, he laughed and said, "You're just here to help, not part of the celebration." The room laughed. I stayed quiet. What I did next changed everything. Now he's bombarding me with messages, begging me to fix it. Hey Reddit, I'm Marin, 34F, and for most of my life, I've been the one who smooths things over in my family. The helper. The calm one. The one who shows up early, stays late, and never asks for anything in return. And maybe that worked for a while. Maybe it even made me feel like I had some place in the family, even if it wasn't center stage. But something shifted recently, and now I'm sitting here staring at texts from my dad that I never thought I'd see. Not after what he said, not after what I did, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back a few months to when this all started. My dad, Colin, was preparing to retire from his career in civil engineering. 40 years with the same firm, a big portfolio of city infrastructure projects under his belt, and, if you ask him, a reputation that speaks for itself. He was planning his exit like it was a coronation. My mom, Helen, was buzzing with excitement. She kept saying, "It'll be so nice to finally have him home," though I don't think she fully understood what that would mean. My parents are the kind of couple who've settled into their roles like worn-out shoes. Dad leads, mom follows. She's lovely, really, but she's always been more focused on appearances than emotions. My siblings, Theo, 31M, and Isla, 29F, fit right into that mold. Theo is the golden boy, though we don't use that phrase in front of Dad. He followed in Dad's footsteps, literally. Same college, same field, even interned at the same firm. Dad glows when Theo talks, laughs like it's the best sound he's ever heard. Isla is the baby in every sense. Creative, spontaneous, always doing something new and exciting. She moves through life like a breeze, and everyone smiles when she enters the room. She's the family cheerleader. When she forgets things, she's free-spirited. When I forget something, it's unprofessional. And then there's me, the eldest. I work as a freelance event planner. Yes, a real job, that you wouldn't think so if you heard how my dad talks about it. Once, during a family dinner, he told someone, "Marin does party planning stuff. She's very organized." That's it. No mention of the awards I've won, the corporate clients I've worked with, or the fact that I literally built my business from scratch. So when my mom called and said, "Your dad would love it if you helped out with his retirement party," I already knew what that meant. Help, not plan, not manage. Just assist. Quietly. From the background. Still, I agreed. Not because I wanted praise, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't hope for some acknowledgement, but because it was my dad. Despite everything, I thought maybe this would be a chance to be seen. Maybe if I handled this party perfectly, he'd finally look at me the way he looks at Theo. Or at least thank me. I started planning everything from the ground up. My parents had booked a nice community center with a large hall and a garden space. It wasn't fancy, but it had potential. I took it from there, drafted a timeline, created a mood board, worked with a caterer I trust, ordered rentals for tables, linens, lighting. I coordinated parking with the venue, made personalized signs, arranged for a slideshow of Dad's career highlights. I even convinced one of my photographer friends to capture the night as a favor. The guest list was massive, over 120 people, including former coworkers, family friends, and a handful of Dad's old college buddies. I spent weeks emailing people, tracking down RSVPs, following up on plus ones, and juggling last-minute changes that my mom insisted were tiny, but actually disrupted the seating chart every time. Theo and Isla? They popped in occasionally. Theo helped put together a playlist, mostly classic rock and a few jazz instrumentals. Isla volunteered to make centerpieces and then forgot until the day before. I ended up assembling them myself after midnight, with my laptop playing soothing ocean sounds just to keep myself from getting too tense. The night before the party, I slept for maybe 3 hours. I was up before sunrise, loaded my car with supplies, and got to the venue by 7:30 a.m. The event wasn't scheduled to start until 5 p.m., but there was a lot to do. Unload boxes, check in with vendors, set up chairs and decorations, run to a local store for last-minute items my mom forgot to mention. I barely sat down. When my dad arrived around 4:30, fresh from a haircut and wearing a blazer that still had the price tag tucked into the sleeve, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd stop and say something. "Thanks, Marin," or "This looks great." Instead, he gave me a nod, glanced around, and said, "Looks like it's coming together." Then he walked off to talk to his old boss, leaving me holding a box of unused name cards. Fine. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't doing this for attention. I was doing it because I cared. Right? Guests started to arrive. Laughter filled the hall. The tables glowed under soft amber lights. People greeted my dad like he was some kind of legend. Which, in their eyes, I guess he was. I moved around the room quietly, checking in with the caterers, making sure the slideshow was running, offering help wherever it was needed. I even changed into a dress and touched up my makeup in the bathroom, hoping I'd feel more like a guest and less like a staff member. Then the speeches started. The speeches began just after sunset, once everyone had settled into their seats and finished dinner. The lights dimmed slightly, casting a warm glow across the room. A hush fell over the crowd as my mom stood and tapped her glass with a spoon. "I just want to thank everyone for coming," she began, smiling that perfect, practiced smile she always wore when entertaining guests. "This night means so much to Colin and to our family. 40 years of hard work, leadership, and dedication. He's built more than buildings, he's built a legacy." Polite applause followed. I stood at the back near the dessert table, arms folded loosely in front of me. My feet ached, but I stayed still. She handed the microphone to Theo, who got up with an easy confidence, as if this entire evening had been built around him. And in a way, it had. He started by thanking Dad for being his role model, his mentor, his inspiration to pursue greatness. He told a long story about building a treehouse with Dad when he was 8 and somehow turned it into a metaphor about architecture and family structure. It was polished, rehearsed. He even made people laugh. But every word was a mirror held up to my dad, showing him exactly the son he wanted to see. When Theo finished, Dad stood and clapped before pulling him into a hug. Then came Isla. Sweet, impulsive Isla, who walked up barefoot because her heels hurt and started her speech by saying, "I didn't really write anything down," followed by 10 minutes of rambling about memories from family vacations, inside jokes with Dad, and how he's always been the solid one in the chaos. She cried near the end. Dad wiped her tears with a napkin and kissed the top of her head. More applause. A few people even dabbed at their eyes. I waited a moment, then made my way toward my dad. I didn't need a long speech, just a few words. A chance to thank him, to acknowledge the night, to be part of it. He was standing near the head table, still smiling from Isla's speech, when I approached. "Hey," I said gently, keeping my voice low so others wouldn't hear. "Would it be okay if I said a few words?" He looked at me, blinking once. Then, without hesitation, he laughed. Not a mean-spirited cackle, worse, actually. It was the kind of laugh you give someone when they say something ridiculous. He looked around, as if expecting others to laugh with him. "Oh, Marin," he said, shaking his head. "You've done enough already. You're just here to help, remember?" A few people nearby chuckled, just enough to make my stomach twist. Someone whispered, "She's always so serious," and another voice added, "She just wants to make it about herself." My smile froze in place. I felt the burn behind my eyes, but I refused to blink. Instead, I nodded once. Of course, I said softly. Whatever you think. And I walked away. Back to the dessert table. Back to the shadows. I stayed quiet through the rest of the speeches. Watch as my dad took photos with Theo and Isla, raising his glass for each pose, arms around their shoulders. I wasn't asked to join a single picture. No one thanked me. No one noticed I had gone silent. The rest of the night blurred by in a haze of laughter and music. I cleared empty plates, tidied up stray decorations, and made sure the vendors were packing up on schedule. I even drove Isla home when her feet hurt too much to walk back to the car. She fell asleep in the passenger seat. By the time I got back to my apartment, the clock read just past midnight. My phone buzzed once. A text from my dad. Thanks again for helping today. Party went well. That was it. No mention of the effort. No acknowledgement of the work. Just a polite nod. Like I'd set up folding chairs for a PTA meeting. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I opened my laptop. I wasn't looking to get even, not at first. I just wanted to document everything. My receipts. My timelines. My emails. I wanted something to look at and remind myself I wasn't crazy for feeling invisible. But somewhere in the middle of scrolling through photos of the party, something clicked. A slow, steady realization. They never saw me. Not once. And I wasn't going to beg for a seat at a table I built with my own hands. After that night, I didn't respond to my dad's message. I needed space to think. Not out of anger, at least not at first, but out of something deeper. Something that felt like grief. Grief for the version of myself that kept showing up, that kept hoping. I spent the next day doing nothing. I left my laptop closed, let my phone stay silent, and simply sat with the stillness. The party was over. Everyone had gone home, posted their pictures, said their goodbyes. My parents probably went to bed thinking it had all gone perfectly. And to be fair, on the surface, it had. But underneath the decorations and speeches and staged smiles, something had quietly shifted. Not for them, for me. And I knew exactly what I was going to do. The first step was subtle. I logged into the shared folder I'd created for the event, where I had stored all the planning documents, invoices, and photos, and removed their access. Not out of spite, but because I owned the account. I had paid for the upgraded storage. I had created every file. They hadn't touched it. Not once. Then I sat down and carefully drafted a letter. Not an email. A real letter. Printed on smooth, ivory stationery I'd been saving for client thank yous. I addressed it to Colin and Helen, my parents, and signed it with my full name at the bottom. Not your daughter. Not Marin. Just Marini Winslow, event director. Inside the envelope, I included a detailed invoice. Not inflated, just honest. It listed every hour I worked. Every cost I had covered out of pocket. Every vendor I'd coordinated, down to the florist Isla forgot to call. I even included the cost of mileage for driving across the city multiple times for items Mom insisted couldn't be shipped. The total came out to just over $4,200. It wasn't about the money. It was about value. On the envelope, I wrote in clean, even letters, professional invoice, services rendered. And I mailed it. I didn't warn them. I didn't text or call. I just let it arrive. 3 days later, my phone started buzzing. First, a missed call from my mom. Then a message from my dad. What is this about? This has to be a mistake. I didn't respond. Later that evening, another message. You're being unreasonable. We're family. Family helps each other. I didn't reply to that one either. The next morning, I received an email, long, rambling, and clearly typed by my mom about how the party was a gift for your father's legacy and how we never imagined you would treat us like clients. She said I was turning a joyful night into something ugly. I read it twice. Then I archived it. I didn't stop there. A week later, I published a blog post on my professional website. I kept it anonymous, using only initials and vague references. The title was simple, The Invisible Planner, When Family Expects Free Labor. It detailed the emotional weight of being the behind-the-scenes worker in your own family, how people assume your time and skills are just available. The post gained traction. Other planners, stylists, designers, they shared it. It spread across a few industry Facebook groups. I started getting messages from people who had gone through the same thing. Siblings asking for free photo shoots. Parents demanding wedding favors. Friends who expected floral arrangements for cost or less. My story wasn't rare. And that was the point. About 2 weeks after the party, I got another call. This time I picked up. Marin, my dad said. His voice was tired. Yes, I said, flat. He hesitated. Can we just talk? Face to face? Your mother and I feel like there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I said calmly. Just a long overdue correction. There was silence. Then, you've made your point. But don't you think this is a bit much? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because that had always been the phrase they used whenever I tried to set a boundary. Too sensitive, too serious, too much. I didn't answer. I just let the silence hang. Eventually, he added, you don't have to be like this. No, I said. I don't. And I won't be anymore. I hung up. That weekend, Theo called. He left a voicemail saying something about family unity and how I shouldn't let a single night ruin things. He offered to mediate if I needed someone rational to step in. I deleted it. Then Isla texted. Her message was shorter, but it still carried the same patronizing tone. Hey, not sure what's going on, but you're scaring Mom. Can we talk? I didn't answer. I wasn't trying to scare anyone, but they needed to feel it. The quiet, the distance, the cost. And still, I wasn't done. Because there was one final step. One that would make sure they didn't sweep this under the rug, pretend it never happened. I had one last thing to reveal, something they'd never expect. The final step came the following Monday. I sat at my desk, opened the folder I'd labeled Project Legacy, and stared at the neatly organized documents inside. Contracts, receipts, planning notes, timelines, and the finalized vendor list. I had even kept the color palettes and seating charts in case they ever needed to reference them, though I knew by now they never would. I stared at the screen for a long time before opening a blank document. It was time to write the final case study. You see, 2 months before the retirement party, I had been planning a soft launch for my full-time event planning business. It was something I'd been dreaming about but never had the time or courage to fully pursue. For years, I did events on the side, charity luncheons, small weddings, community dinners. Always as favors. Always for less than I was worth. I had built a quiet but strong portfolio. Still, I hesitated. I think, deep down, I had internalized the way my family saw me. Helpful, reliable, background support. The one who made things run smoothly without asking for anything in return. But that night, at the party, standing there while the room laughed, and my father said I wasn't part of the celebration, it jolted something loose in me. Something final. I had done all that work, carried all that weight, and been invisible. Worse, my effort had been dismissed as a given. Expected. A background task like refilling napkins or fixing a folding chair. So I stopped waiting for their approval and started moving like someone who didn't need it. The case study was clean, polished, and professional. I wrote it like a third-party observer would. Objective, precise, but with just enough personality to show my process. I described how I handled vendor coordination, design execution, budget tracking, and conflict management without naming names. I even detailed the logistical challenges I overcame during setup, like having to reconfigure the table layout when the chairs they ordered were the wrong height and a rental company backed out 2 days before the event. Then I drafted a short piece for my website's blog. I titled it, The Invisible Planner, When Family Expects Free Labor. I didn't include identifying details. I didn't need to. The story, unfortunately, was far too relatable. I spoke about how emotional labor and professional expertise are often undervalued when you're helping family. How boundaries blur, expectations grow, and appreciation fades until you're no longer seen as a skilled professional, just a pair of hands. It wasn't bitter. It was reflective. I published it on a Thursday. By Saturday, it had been picked up and shared by 3 event planning networks and dozens of freelancers on social media. My inbox filled up with messages from other professionals, photographers, designers, bakers, coordinators, thanking me for saying what they hadn't found the words for. One woman told me she was still waiting to be paid for the wedding she planned for her own sister. By Monday, I had 3 new client inquiries. By Friday, I had 9. And by the end of the month, I had officially transitioned from part-time planner to full-time business owner. 3 weeks after the party, I received a certified envelope in the mail. It was a check. No note. No apology. No acknowledgement of what it meant. Just the full amount from the invoice I had sent, down to the penny. I stared at it for a while before placing it in my business folder. It was a transaction. Nothing more. But that's what they wanted, right? A task completed. A service rendered. I had provided exactly that. I had been professional, detailed, and courteous, even when they hadn't been. I deposited the check and didn't reply. The messages started trickling in after that. First from my dad. I hope we can move past this. It was never meant to be hurtful. Then my mom. You're taking this too far. We're family. You made your father feel like he did something wrong on a night that was supposed to be joyful. Then Theo chimed in. If you want help smoothing things over, let me know. No hard feelings on my end. That made me pause. No hard feelings on your end? He had watched it happen. Watched the way I'd been treated. And not once had he stepped in. Not to defend me. Not even to acknowledge it. It was easier for him to stay neutral than to admit that something had been unfair. Isla was the only one who genuinely reached out. She sent a long, thoughtful message that acknowledged how much I had done. She said she was sorry for how they had treated me. She said she didn't know how to make it right, but that she wanted to understand. I thanked her, but I didn't offer anything more. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. In the 8 months that followed, everything changed, but not in the loud, dramatic way you might expect. It was gradual, quiet, the kind of transformation that doesn't announce itself, but becomes undeniable once it's complete. My business, which had once felt like a hopeful side project, grew faster than I ever imagined. Word spread. One client led to another, and then another. People remembered how I made them feel taken care of, how I handled problems before they became problems. A florist I worked with on a charity gala referred me to her cousin's engagement party. That party turned into a destination wedding. From there, it was like dominoes. I hired my first assistant, Ray, a month in. She started part-time, mostly helping with logistics and communication. But as the requests kept coming, she quickly became full-time, and now I genuinely don't know how I ever managed without her. We built a rhythm, a system, a shared language that made even the most chaotic events run smoothly. I trusted her completely, and for the first time, I felt what it was like to work with someone who truly respected my boundaries, my time, and my process. I upgraded my website. I raised my rates. I stopped explaining or justifying my prices to anyone. When a potential client asked for a discount or tried to barter with exposure, I politely declined. I didn't feel guilty anymore. I no longer felt like I needed to overcompensate or make myself small to be hired. 3 cities. 9 large-scale events. For speaking engagements. A guest spot on a podcast about women-led creative businesses. I remember walking into a room of strangers who had all read my blog post and heard me speak. They weren't interested in my family name or who I'd worked for in the past. They wanted to know how I built something of my own from the ground up after being overlooked for so long. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I realized I had stopped thinking about what my family might say. I no longer measured my success against their opinions. That pressure, the one I had carried for years, to be helpful, to stay useful, to avoid rocking the boat, lifted without me noticing. I breathed deeper. I stood taller. Meanwhile, my family and I drifted, not with a blowout or an official falling out, but with silence. I didn't go back to the house. No one called to invite me over. I saw the photos online, Dad grinning at some small backyard barbecue, Mom rearranging plates on a folding table, Theo with his usual fixed smile. Same poses, same dynamics. But this time, I wasn't in the background, holding up the corners. And the strange thing was, I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel rejected. I felt peaceful. I think they expected I'd fold eventually. That after a few weeks of quiet, I'd show up for the next family holiday, carrying a tray of appetizers, setting the table, answering questions about what I've been up to while they barely listened. That I would slip back into the old role, the helper, the assistant, the reliable one who never asked for space or credit. But I didn't. And they didn't know what to do with that. Because for the first time, I had taken the energy I used to pour into proving myself to them and invested it into myself. That's when I realized something it had taken me 37 years to fully understand. If you let people define you only by what you do for them, they will never learn to value who you actually are. They won't see the ideas, the ambition, the strength behind your help. They'll just expect it. And when you stop giving it so freely, they'll say you've changed, when really, you've just started protecting your worth. I wasn't just there to help. I wasn't the background crew to someone else's story. I had my own story, and I was finally living it. And I was never going back. That's where things stand now. The business is thriving. My days are full of creativity, autonomy, and mutual respect. I work with clients who see me, not just what I can do for them. I wake up excited to plan, to design, to build experiences that matter. And I go to sleep knowing I created something that belongs entirely to me. No more walking on eggshells. No more waiting to be acknowledged. No more making myself small so others can stay comfortable. My family still doesn't quite understand what changed, but I do. And that's enough. At Thanksgiving dinner, my mom beamed. Let's toast to the child who truly embraced our family values. Everyone applauded my sister, who was seated at the head of the table. My spot. It was a fold-out chair by the kitchen. I stood and said, "You know, it's good to hear the truth sometimes." I headed for the door, but my dad's voice, surprisingly strong, cut through the silence. "Wait, tell them. I'm Simon, 42, and this Thanksgiving felt like a turning point I never saw coming. I've always known my family wasn't what you'd call close, but this year, things were more tense, colder than usual. I don't want to say toxic, but after what happened, it's hard not to. A little context. I'm the middle child of 3. Evelyn, my older sister, is exactly the kind of person mom and dad love to brag about. The model daughter who knows what it means to carry on the family legacy. She's polished, successful by their standards, and always playing the part perfectly. Felix, my younger brother, is quieter, more agreeable, and mom favors him just enough to keep the peace. Then there's me, Simon, the black sheep, the one who dared to think differently, who didn't want to fit into their narrow little box. Thanksgiving at my parents' house has always been a test of endurance. The food is fine, but the real meal is the undercurrent of judgment, the way mom watches you like a hawk, waiting to pounce on any sign of weakness or disrespect. Dad sits back, usually quiet, but I could always tell he's approving behind the scenes. This year, when I arrived, the first thing I noticed was how perfectly everything was arranged. The big oak dining table was set with the best china, gleaming silverware, and spotless crystal glasses. Mom had even gone so far as to iron every napkin to a perfect crease. Evelyn was already there, seated at the head of the table, smiling that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. Felix was off to one side, chatting quietly with Dad. And me? I got the fold-out chair by the kitchen doorway, not even close to the table. When I asked, Mom smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, Simon, you know how precious the family traditions are. We want you close enough to help with the serving." I nodded, though it stung more than I wanted to admit. The evening wore on with the usual rehearsed conversations. Evelyn told stories about her latest promotion, the wonderful people she worked with, and how she was the pillar of her team. Mom nodded eagerly, clearly basking in her daughter's spotlight. Felix chipped in now and then with his own modest updates, always careful not to overshadow Evelyn. Then came the moment that cut the deepest. Just as we were about to start the meal, Mom stood, lifted her glass, and said, "Let's toast to the child who truly embraced our family values." A beat of silence. Then the entire table erupted in applause. Everyone looked at Evelyn. She gave a little nod, a tight smile, soaking in the praise as if she'd just won a Lifetime Achievement Award. I sat back, the clapping still ringing in my ears, feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in that room. No nod, no word, no acknowledgement. The meal began, but I was no longer hungry. Watching Evelyn at the head of the table, glowing in the spotlight, while I sat on that flimsy chair, I felt invisible. Not just ignored, but erased. After a while, the conversations took a predictable turn. How Evelyn was the only one who really understood what the family stood for. How she was carrying the torch for all of us. I could hear the whispered criticisms aimed at me, the subtle digs disguised as jokes about my lack of direction or how I'd abandoned our roots. That's when I finally stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the tile floor, all eyes turning to me. "You know," I said, voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "It's good to hear the truth sometimes." I didn't wait for anyone to respond. I headed straight for the door, the cool night air hitting my face like a relief from the suffocating atmosphere inside. But just as my hand touched the doorknob, my dad's voice stopped me. Clear, firm, impossible to ignore. "Wait, tell them." I turned slowly, eyes scanning the room. Mom looked stunned, Evelyn's smile faltered, and Felix seemed genuinely surprised. The silence stretched as everyone waited to see what Dad meant. When my dad said, "Wait, tell them," it was like the dam broke. The room, which had been tense but polite moments before, now felt charged with a strange mix of confusion and anticipation. Every eye was on me, expecting something, anything, to fill that heavy silence. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. I wasn't sure if Dad's words were some kind of rare show of support or if he was just trying to keep up appearances. But I realized that whatever happened next, this moment was my chance to finally say what I'd been holding inside for years. So, you want me to tell them what? I asked quietly, scanning the faces of my family. Mom's smile had disappeared, replaced by something tight and guarded. Evelyn looked sharp, like a cat ready to pounce, and Felix was already shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Dad cleared his throat. You know what I mean. Tell them the truth about everything. I swallowed. I could feel the eyes burning into me. Expectations, judgment, anticipation. And a surprising flicker of something else, maybe guilt, maybe fear, passing through Dad's expression before he masked it with neutrality. All right, I said, and the room seemed to lean in, waiting for a show. Here's the truth, I started. The child who truly embraced our family values. That's Evelyn. At least, that's what you all like to say. I gestured toward her, and she held my gaze with a confident smirk. But those family values are the very things that have kept me at the edges of this family, pushed me into the shadows. And I'm done pretending they mean something good. Mom's face flushed slightly, but she said nothing. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, and Felix shifted even more in his seat. I continued, voice firm. For years, I've watched how values are used to judge who belongs and who doesn't. How loyalty really means blind obedience to your idea of success, your idea of what's right. How speaking up gets you labeled ungrateful or rebellious. A few heads shifted uncomfortably, but no one interrupted. You've praised Evelyn for being perfect, for following every rule, for making sure the family looks good on the outside. But what about the rest of us? What about the rest of me? I paused, feeling my voice catch a little. I've always tried to be myself, to build my own path. But that path apparently doesn't fit your narrow vision. And so, I get the fold-out chair by the kitchen, the cold smiles, the whispers behind my back. Mom's jaw tightened. She opened her mouth, but Dad cut her off with a raised hand. Let him finish. That surprised me. Dad was always the quiet enabler, the one who let Mom take the lead in these power plays. But tonight, something was different. I took a breath and pressed on. You call Evelyn the pillar of the family, but she's also the one who made sure I never got a fair chance. The one who spread rumors about me not being serious enough, who undermined me at family events, who made sure I was always the problem to be handled. Evelyn's smirk faded, replaced by cold disdain. That's ridiculous, Simon. You've always been difficult. You don't take responsibility for anything. I take responsibility for being who I am, and I'm tired of your definition of family values that only serve your image, I said, voice growing stronger. Felix, who had been quiet, finally spoke up, voice shaky. Simon, you're blowing this out of proportion. Mom and Dad just want what's best for all of us. What's best for you all, maybe, I replied. But not for me. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mom stood suddenly, smoothing her blouse. This isn't the place for this, she said sharply. You're ruining Thanksgiving. I'm ruining your fantasy, I answered. The truth is always messy. At that moment, the doorbell rang. It was almost a surreal interruption. Mom's face tightened again. Who could that be? She muttered. Dad stood and walked toward the door, opening it with a cautious glance behind him. A man stepped inside, dressed sharply, holding a folder under his arm. Everyone froze. Good evening, the man said, voice calm but firm. I'm Mr. Langley, the lawyer representing Simon. The room erupted, not with applause, but with shock and confusion. Mom's face went pale, her eyes darting to Dad. Evelyn's perfect mask cracked just a little. Felix looked stunned. Mr. Langley continued. I'm here to present some documents regarding the family estate and other matters that need immediate attention. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mom's voice was low but icy. Simon, what is this? I stepped forward, calm now, feeling a surge of clarity I hadn't had before. I'm done being the forgotten one, the scapegoat. Tonight, I'm taking what's mine. Everyone stared, the old power balance cracking in the cold kitchen light. Mom's eyes flashed with fury. You think you can just waltz in and demand half of what Evelyn and I have worked for? Not just half, I said. What's rightfully mine? Evelyn stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. You're delusional. This family made you. Without us, you'd have nothing. That's exactly the problem, I said. You don't see me as family unless I fit your perfect little mold. Felix looked between us, the weight of years of silence finally bearing down on him. Dad stepped in, voice quieter but firm. We can't let this destroy us. But you already have, I said. The room felt like it was about to collapse, the floor beneath us cracking open with all the resentment, jealousy, and secrets that had been buried for too long. And then Mom, the matriarch who always controlled the narrative, let out a laugh, cold and bitter. If you think you're walking away with anything tonight, you're dreaming. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear or doubt. I felt something stronger, resolve. Because this wasn't just about an inheritance. It was about taking back my dignity. About exposing a family that wore its smiles like masks while stabbing me in the back. The moment Mom laughed, cold and sharp, the whole room shifted. It wasn't the laugh of someone who thought this was funny. It was the laugh of someone who was already planning the next move. The one who thrived on control and power. Dreaming, she said, voice low but icy. Simon, you don't know what you're messing with. I met her gaze steadily. No, Mom. I know exactly what I'm doing. And I'm done being the family joke. The lawyer, Mr. Langley, stepped forward and placed the folder on the kitchen counter, flipping it open with a calm authority that made even Mom pause. This, he said, pointing at the papers, is the will your father signed last year. Simon, you've been officially recognized as a rightful heir. There's enough here to ensure your share, legally binding. I could see Mom's eyes flicker in panic, but she masked it quickly, lips pressed tight. Evelyn sneered. Dad was pressured into this, no doubt. You can't just waltz in and take what's ours. I'm not waltzing anywhere, I replied. I'm claiming what's mine. The next few hours were a whirlwind of heated exchanges, thinly veiled threats, and old wounds reopened. But what surprised me most was Dad. For years, he'd been quiet, the silent partner in Mom's schemes. But tonight, he showed cracks, moments of hesitation, and even subtle nods my way. Later, after the guests had left and the house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the hallway clock, Dad pulled me aside. Simon, he said, voice low, I've been carrying secrets. Things your mother doesn't want you to know. If you want to fight for your place in this family, you'll need more than just the law. He handed me a worn envelope, yellowed with age. Read this. It's why things are the way they are. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of letters, old photos, and documents, proof of years of manipulation, favoritism, and even financial misdeeds by Mom and Evelyn. They'd been systematically cutting me out, taking more than their share, twisting the truth behind closed doors. It was the fuel I needed. This wasn't just about an inheritance or a dinner seat. It was about exposing a family built on lies. Over the next weeks, I started quietly gathering more evidence. I hired a private investigator, discreetly contacted old family friends, and even reached out to some of Evelyn's business associates who had complained quietly about her ruthless behavior behind the scenes. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. Evelyn was far from the perfect daughter. She had embezzled from family accounts, sabotaged Felix's chances at promotions to keep the spotlight, and spread vicious rumors about me to keep me sidelined. Mom wasn't innocent either. She had hidden assets, forged signatures on documents, and orchestrated a web of control that kept everyone under her thumb. Felix, who had seemed passive, confessed one night over coffee that he felt trapped. They made us all play their game, he said. I'm tired of pretending. With his reluctant cooperation, I started piecing together a plan. It was slow, careful work, not a dramatic confrontation, but a strategic unraveling of their power. Then came the moment I invited Mom, Dad, Evelyn, and Felix to a family meeting. I told them it was to discuss the estate, but really, it was the stage for my next move. The setting was deliberate, our old family home's living room, where so many of their manipulations had taken place. I laid out the documents on the coffee table, one by one, watching their expressions shift from disbelief to panic. Mom, Evelyn, I began, you've built this family image on control, manipulation, and lies. It's time the truth came out. Mom's face hardened, but Evelyn looked pale. Felix avoided eye contact. I didn't let up. I detailed the evidence, the forged documents, the financial tricks, the emotional manipulation. Every piece chipped away at their carefully constructed facade. Why did you do this? I asked, voice calm but fierce. Mom's response was chilling. Because you threatened everything we built. Because you couldn't be trusted. Evelyn sneered. You were always the problem, Simon. Too stubborn, too independent. This is how families survive, by keeping order. I shook my head. No, this is how families destroy themselves. The meeting ended in chaos, shouting, accusations, slammed doors. But something had shifted. The power dynamics had changed. I wasn't the outcast anymore. I held the cards. But with power came resistance. Mom and Evelyn didn't give up. They launched their own attacks, trying to turn Felix against me, calling old friends with lies about my character, even attempting legal maneuvers to block my claims. I expected it. What I didn't expect was how deeply they would sink into villainy. One afternoon, I received a call from Felix, voice shaking. "Simon, Mom's trying to make me sign papers that would cut you out entirely. She's threatening me, saying I'll lose everything if I don't comply." It was the first time I realized this fight wasn't just legal or emotional. It was a battle for survival. I reassured him, "Don't sign anything without talking to me first. We'll get through this." And we did. Slowly, methodically, Felix started breaking free from their grip. Months passed, and the war of wills continued. I built alliances, relatives who had felt sidelined, family friends who'd seen the truth but never spoke up. I even managed to get some community leaders involved when it became clear that Mom's influence extended beyond just family. Each step forward was met with a counterattack, but I refused to back down. I hired a financial expert to audit the estate. We uncovered more discrepancies, hidden accounts, and questionable transactions. Evelyn tried to keep up appearances publicly, but privately, her veneer cracked. She sent thinly veiled threats, messages implying she knew things about my past that could ruin me. I ignored them. The truth was my shield. Then came the day of the family's annual summer gala, a prestigious event that Evelyn had always used to cement her status. This year, I wasn't invited, but I made sure to be there anyway, not as a guest, but as a revelation. Standing just outside the grand ballroom, I handed the event organizer a folder containing copies of all the evidence we had gathered. The organizer's face paled as she read through the documents. Inside the gala, Evelyn was mingling, radiant as ever, telling stories, laughing with politicians and business leaders. Mom was by her side, the perfect hostess. But outside, quietly and deliberately, I was about to pull the curtain back on everything. The night of the gala arrived with all its usual pomp. The chandeliers glittering, the chatter of polished voices, the clink of glasses filled with sparkling water. Evelyn moved through the crowd like a queen reigning over her kingdom, flawless and untouchable. Mom was beside her, the perfect picture of pride and control. But I wasn't inside the ballroom. Instead, I was just outside the main entrance, holding the folder of evidence tightly. I handed it to the event organizer, a woman I'd spoken with carefully over the past weeks. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the pages: bank statements, signed affidavits from family friends, records of forged signatures, and even recorded conversations where Mom and Evelyn discussed their plans to sideline me. I watched as her face paled, then resolutely nodded. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. "Make sure the right people see this," I said. "This gala is where the family's reputation is on the line. It's time the truth came out, publicly." She agreed. Inside, Evelyn was just about to give a toast, a moment she had clearly rehearsed many times. Her smile was radiant, her voice warm as she spoke of family and legacy. The crowd was hanging on every word. Then the lights flickered. The music stopped abruptly. A hush fell over the ballroom. Before anyone could react, a projector flickered to life against one wall, displaying the first slide, a headline that read, "The Dark Truth Behind the Perfect Family." A voice echoed through the speakers, calm, steady, and unmistakably mine. "Good evening. You know me as Simon, the forgotten middle child, the one always on the sidelines. Tonight, I'm here to tell you the truth about the family you admire, the values they claim to uphold, and the lies that have been carefully hidden for years." Images flashed on the screen, bank statements showing missing funds, letters revealing betrayals, excerpts from phone calls exposing deceit. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's smile vanished, replaced by shock and fury. Mom's face was ashen. "This family has been built on manipulation, greed, and control," I continued. "My sister Evelyn embezzled funds from our family accounts. My mother forged signatures to keep me out of the estate. They tried to silence me, to erase me." Voices started murmuring, questions rising like a tide. From the back of the room, a local news reporter pushed forward, microphone in hand. "Simon, is this true? What do you expect to happen now?" "I expect accountability," I said firmly. "No more lies. No more favoritism. I'm reclaiming my place, not just in the family, but in the truth." The aftermath was swift and brutal. The gala was cut short. Media outlets caught wind of the revelations overnight, publishing stories that painted my family in an unflattering light. Sponsors pulled their support from Mom's charity boards. Evelyn lost several key business partnerships as her reputation for dishonesty spread. Felix, finally freed from their influence, publicly apologized to me and stepped away from the family drama, focusing on rebuilding his own life. Mom retreated into silence, isolated and stripped of the social standing she'd so carefully curated. Evelyn tried to fight back with lawyers and public statements, but the evidence was overwhelming. She lost control over family assets, and her business began to crumble. As for me, I took what was rightfully mine. The estate was settled fairly, and I finally felt the weight of years of invisibility lift. But more than the money or the assets, it was the reclamation of my dignity and truth that mattered most. I don't pretend this healed everything. The wounds run deep, and the family I once knew is fractured beyond repair. But sometimes, justice isn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. Sometimes, it's about standing up, exposing the darkness, and refusing to be silenced any longer. So that's where I stand now, free from the shadows, finally seen for who I am, and ready to build my own legacy on my own terms. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.